Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies for the delay. We've had a bit of a technical issue, but we seem to be up and running now. The rubber band's being repaired. So welcome along to tonight's planning meeting with Rushcliffe Borough Council. I'm Councillor Richard Butler, the Chairman of the committee. To my left is Councillor John Stockwood, who is my Vice Chairman. To his left is Mr Norman, who is our Legal Services Manager. And we have Miss Webb on the end, who is one of our constitutional officers. And on my right is Mr Pegram, who is Service Manager for Communities, and to his right is Mr Pennington, who is Area Planning Officer and new to this committee. So welcome to you. It's your first meeting, so welcome. So we'll go into the agenda. Apologies for absence, please, and substitute members.
Apologies from Councillor Purdue-Horan and Councillor Clark. Substitutes are Councillor Donoghue and Councillor Hetherington.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, councillors. And do we have any declarations of interest under the Code of Conduct or under the Planning Code? Councillor Mallender.
Thank you, Chair. Reference number 1802456 full. So that's 119 Gertrude Road. I will be speaking as a ward councillor, so I'll be crossing to the rear of the other side when we come to the fifth item in the agenda.
Righty-ho, thank you very much. We got that. Do we have any other declarations? No? Okay, so we'll go on to the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held way back on the 13th, well, it seems a long time ago, 13th of December. And is it your wish that I was cut off in my prime then, so there we are. Right, so we go into the main items on the agenda tonight, which is planning applications for... can you hear me? So has this thing gone off?
Just keeps going off.
Cut, it's a bit like Ian, what wasn't it? Ian, oh, the comedian. Oh, Norman Collier, whatever, anyway. So the first item on tonight's agenda is, for planning applications, is in Keyworth. It's 9 Thelder Avenue, Keyworth. This is to demolish a bungalow and erect 4 semi-detached dwellings. And Mr Pennington, you're going to talk us through this, please.
Okay, thank you. Right, so the application relates to 2 pairs of semi-detached properties in a mainly residential area. The aerial photograph here you can see shows the existing bungalow and the surrounding area. And here, going to the photographs, is the existing bungalow behind an existing hedge. This is looking south along Thelder Avenue. There's a slight slope along the roads, so we're going sloping upwards towards the south. And then looking sort of back the other way is back down towards the bottom end of Thelder Avenue, sloping downwards with the neighbouring bungalow at Greenacres also in the photograph. Heading to the rear of the site now, into the back garden. This is a view of the site from looking towards the neighbouring property at number 11 Thelder Avenue. This forms one of a group of 4 terraced properties. And then looking back towards the other side, this is towards the neighbouring bungalow at Greenacres. And this is looking towards the rear from the garden, towards the properties at the rear which are on Dale Road. And this is a photograph from the neighbouring property, inside the neighbouring property at Greenacres, from inside the living room, sort of looking out towards the proposal site. This is the location plan of the proposal. So here you see 2 semi-detached properties, 2 pairs of semi-detached properties proposed. There's 6 metres driveway length at the front for 2 parking spaces per property. There's a 13 metre deep rear garden to the boundary of the neighbours at the rear, on Dale Road. Heading towards now the elevations. So sort of the design, the hipped roof design with a sort of rendered front projection. The rear has a flat roof rear extension proposed as part of the design. They're three bedroom properties, with the third bedroom located on the second floor there. And this is a sort of a street scene elevational diagram. Yeah, you can see the sort of the slant in the roof, slant in the road. So you've got the block of 4 terrace properties there on the right, and then on the other side of the 2 proposed buildings, you've got the neighbouring bungalow at Greenacres. The proposal has been amended. Originally, it showed gay blended properties, 2 gay blended properties, which reach 10 metres to the ridge. They've been amended to show hipped roof and a reduction in height to the ridge to 8.5 metres, having previously been 10 metres. There was also some timber cladding proposed to the front elevation, which has been removed, and this rendered front projection here, where the sort of Juliet balconies are, that has been reduced slightly as well. There's also landscaping is proposed to the front, so you can just about make it out here on this slide. There's landscaping proposed in between each dwelling, sort of comprising low level landscaping, planting, basically, yeah, to sort of separate the 4 dwellings when you look at it from Felder Avenue. Overall, following sort of discussions, negotiations to amend the scheme, as mentioned, the proposal is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pennington. Now, in line with our new way of working, we have speakers on this agenda, on this item. We have 2 speakers. We have an objector who is a neighbour, and we also have the ward councillor. So the first speaker is Mrs. Poole, please. And what happens is you have up to 5 minutes to talk to. It's not a discussion, it's just addressing the committee. As soon as you're ready to start, press the right hand button and the red light will come on and the clock will start counting down. If you're still speaking at 5 minutes, I have to be strict and cut you off, in effect. So as soon as you're ready, yeah.
I'd like to start by thanking those councillors who have taken the time to visit the site this week and listened attentively to our concerns. I live next door to the proposed dwellings, and we downsized to this bungalow 11 years ago for our retirement, and we have installed south-facing solar panels at a cost in excess of £11,000 to supplement our pension. Any compromise to the installation would have a financial impact on us and could adversely affect our present lifestyle. The proposed 4 dwellings, as you can see, they are uphill from our property. They're also south from our property and taller than our bungalow. And as they are so close, they would unreasonably overshadow us. An important precedent was set in February 2007 when a similar application on Felder Avenue was turned down by Rushcliffe Borough councillors. And the main reason was unacceptable overshadowing to the adjacent bungalow. Please note that the bungalow in that case was uphill and south to the proposal, whereas we are downhill and north, which I feel makes our case even stronger. And I hope the principle that was established then would still apply today. Again, in 2006, a similar proposal was rejected for 2 semis to be built on the bungalow below us on Felder Avenue. Again, it was rejected for being overbearing and overshadowing to numbers 11A and 13 on Debdale Lane. The precedent quoted in the design and access statement for building 2 3-storey houses next to a bungalow on Sevendale Road seems irrelevant to me, since that bungalow is uphill and south of the development with a carport in between the 2 plots. The recent planning meeting appraisals claimed that the overdevelopment issue has been addressed by the latest plans. Well, I'd like to know how it's acceptable to replace one single storey with 4 2.5-storey dwellings. The appearance would be cramped, and the small gap optimistically mentioned at both side boundaries will cause the new houses to be suffocatingly close to the existing properties on either side. The slope of the hill on Felder Avenue, I think, is slightly deceptive on the drawings because they seem steeper than they're shown on that. The hill feels steeper than that. The side windows to my lounge are actually principal room windows, as you were shown in the slide earlier, not minor windows as suggested in the appraisals. They give the lounge and my solar panels my main source of light from the south until the sun comes round to the front windows to the west. So a much higher wall next door, only 3.3 metres away as proposed, could cause a serious loss of light to us. I also have concerns about the ground floor windows facing down onto the side of my house. Could it be a condition of approval, if it goes ahead, that they also be non-openable and of obscured glass? Just because they are slightly above, looking down, they could look straight into my lounge. And I have a query about the trees. At least a dozen trees on the boundaries of the site have already been felled. Was the prior removal of these trees authorised by the Rushcliffe Tree Officer? And are they going to be replaced? This was a source of distress to several neighbours. We're not against the development, but it must be appropriate to the area and not at the expense of surrounding neighbours. The council has had many representations from residents on Felder Avenue and on Dale Road, which runs parallel, and the developer has modified his plans, but in my view, not sufficiently. I hope he can scale back his scheme and come up with a plan that will satisfy everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. That was well within time, so thank you for that. It's very clear. So I'll call Councillor Rob Inglis now, who is one of the ward members for Keyworth and the Wolds. As soon as you're ready, thanks.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman and the committee members, in allowing me to speak in regards to this planning application. I've not been contacted to represent the applicant, nor any in favour of proposals. My comments are representative from our objectives who have contacted me, my visits to the location, and from my own conclusions. You have read the summarised comments to my objections in the committee report. I do not agree with the committee recommendation report. It is accepted the site will draw development, but that should not be undertaken to have such a negative effect on the current residents. The application has drawn 100% negative responses. There are no public comments in favour of this application, and the Parish Council also object. It should not force current residents to consider moving from their homes if permission is granted. There has been mention of a precedent being set on a neighbouring road, which to me is irrelevant as its dynamics differ greatly from this application. However, I draw your attention to a previous Rushcliffe planning hearing, 0602031, that refused a very similar application on the same road by proposing the demolition of a bungalow and replacing it with 4 semi-detached houses. I quote, "It would be out of keeping with the prevailing form of development along Felder Avenue and would lead to unacceptable overbearing and overshadowing of number 8 Felder." The starting of 4 houses on this plot can only be described as somewhat adventurous, with the close proximity of the neighbouring property and conflicts with the national policies and local planning guidelines, especially under section 12 of paragraph 127 of the National Planning Policy Framework, as it will not add to the overall quality of the area by negatively inflicted on the other residents by its massing, its overshadowing and with potential parking displacement. In regards to the core strategy policy 10 and Rushcliffe material considerations, Greenacres, the bungalow to the immediate north, will be negatively compromised. It is actually 0.75 metres lower than the proposed plot, which perhaps I question to be accurately portrayed on the elevation plan. I cannot accept the blunt statement that by amending the roof height and the roof pitch, it has addressed the problem of overshadowing. Greenacres will suffer loss of light by the proximity of a high wall mast just 3.3 metres away, north of their lounge windows. It will throw the same shadow 3 metres away to the previous 10 metre plus wall. So the comment in paragraph 26, the concerns about an overbearing and over-dominant impact have therefore been addressed, simply haven't. Greenacres will be evaded their light. In the applicant's design statement, I cannot accept their claim. The proposal will in no way adversely affect daylight enjoyed by the other adjacent buildings due to the distances provided between the proposals and the surrounding. It is therefore assumed that a daylighting assessment is not required. The daylighting assessment survey was suggested in response, but there is no evidence to show this was done or even considered to support this sweeping statement. The report states there are no windows to the principal room that will be affected, but I would say that 2 windows into their lounge is a definite principal room and therefore somewhat significant. The residents have also installed solar panels to their south-facing roof, taking advantage of available light. These will be overshadowed and become less effective, and so how can that not indicate a loss of light? This must contradict paragraph 16 under the policy GP2, GP2D, as the proposal will have an overbearing impact on the neighbours and the energy source amenity will be compromised and does lead to an over-intensive form of development as the plot is too narrow to accommodate 4 houses without affecting neighbours by proximity or complying with planning guidelines. Comparisons to the neighbouring set of 4 terraced houses, 1117, have been made, but again generalising terms have been used. The plot width is only marginal larger, but the distance between the gable end of number 11 to its bungalow, number 9 to its north, is 12.4 metres, considerably more than the 3.3 available here and not causing any overshadowing. The plot 1117 is 10% wider. Whether the bungalow or number 9 or the terraced housing came first, the decision would have been taken to have the 12-metre gap as an acceptable gap. The Rushcliffe residential design states rear gardens should be in excess of 90 metres. These are only 80 metres, therefore 12% short of that recommendation. The front driveways under the Keilworth Neighbourhood Development Plan require an access of 80 metres. These are only 28.8 square metres, less than half of what's recommended. Paragraph 28 section negotiations resulted in a more acceptable scheme. We're asking for a totally acceptable scheme to be looked at. Thank you.
Just 4 seconds left. Well done. Thank you very much. Right. So we've heard from Mrs. Poole and Councillor Inglis, who are raising their concerns and observations and objections to the application to do with overshadowing, being over-intensive, previous refusals in nearby, the comment about side windows they consider are main windows in the bungalow, and also comments about the size or proposed sizes of the rear gardens and front drives, and only negative comments have been received about the application. I think that covers most points. Mr. Pennington, could you, or Mr. Pegram, would you like to pick up on those, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, there was also mention of loss of trees,
Yes,
which is always regrettable, of course. However, Chairman, we, as far as I'm aware, we didn't authorise the removal of the trees. They're not in a conservation area and they're not subject to a tree preservation order, so in that instance there wouldn't be a requirement to seek our consent to remove the trees. As I say, as regrettable as their loss is. Couple of points to pick up on, Chairman. I'll just start with the comments of the ward councillor. He did make a point of making members aware that there was 100% negative comments to the application, including from the parish council. Members will be aware that obviously any comments made on a planning application are a material planning consideration and we have to take them into account. However, the absence of any support or indeed objection for an application is not a determining factor ultimately in whether the application is approved or refused. It has to be weighed in the balance with all the other material planning considerations. Comments made by both parties about the windows in the side elevation. Yes, there are some quite large windows in the side elevation of that bungalow, which are those ones there you can see. They appear to be high level, Chairman. That window is also served by what we would describe as the principal window at the front of the property. So although there may be a degree of impact on those windows, the fact that room is served by other windows, in our view, would not give rise to a sustainable reason for refusal of planning permission. The garden sizes, Chairman, are calculated earlier by me and by the case officer to be between 85 and 86 square metres. Our guide is 90 for properties of this style, so it's not an obligatory requirement, but we set that as a sort of a starting point. These properties do incorporate a single storey element at the rear, which almost looks like an extension. You will note from the application and the recommended conditions that we are suggesting removal of permitted development rights, partly because they already have those single storey elements, and any further extension would erode the gardens further. The size of the drives, Chairman, they are 6 metres long. They're approximately 4.8 metres wide, so they're wide enough to accommodate 2 cars side by side. The guidance that a highway authority would normally use, these are acceptable length. Normally a parking space is either, I think it's 4.8 metres is the minimum you can accept. If it's facing up to a garage, you look for 6 metres, obviously, because then you can get the car on the drive and open the door. And obviously with no garage, it's normally about 5.5. So the driveways are considered to be of an acceptable size, Chairman. Clearly, it is for members to consider and determine whether the scheme is overbearing on neighbouring properties or in the street scene. You have your officers' views in the report, but as decision makers, that's a matter of judgment for yourselves. Reference was made to other permissions granted in the area or refused in the area, and the standard advice obviously to members is each case is considered on its merits. Rarely will there be 2 identical proposals that really give judgment as to what the decision should be on the subsequent application. Interesting enough, Chairman, there was mention of an application to erect 4 semi-detached properties on 4 and 6 Thelder Road. Looking at our system, that appears that was heading in a refusal direction, but was ultimately withdrawn by the applicant. There was then a subsequent application. I don't know if these have been built at all. I suspect not, perhaps, but there was a subsequent application for a pair of semi-detached properties on almost half of the site. The previous one that was proposed to be refused, they were very much taller and very dominant properties, higher than the neighbouring properties. And as you've seen from the proposal this evening, an attempt has been made to keep these in keeping with the general height of properties in the street. One final point, Chairman, and it's a bit of a difficult one, and that is the impact on solar panels. Mention was made by the neighbour that it could affect the efficiency of those panels and affect them financially. Obviously, that in itself, the financial impact, to my mind, would not be a material planning consideration. Solar panels are relatively new in terms of technology, Chairman, and I'm not aware, or I haven't been made aware yet, of an application that was refused because of impact on solar panels. So at the moment, I think the jury's out on that one as to whether overshadowing of a solar panel would justify refusal of planning permission. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you, Mr. Pegram. So we get to a point now where we start discussing the application, and the first name I have on the list is Councillor Donoghue, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Pegram. And although I'm not opposed to a development on the site in question, I believe that we have a moral duty to protect the residents that are already living in the area. And from the evidence in front of me, I think to try for development to be squeezed into such a small plot with detriment to light and solar panels, and also the distress caused by having 4 houses just 3.3 metres away, I just don't think it's fair on the existing resident. And also looking at the designs, I don't feel it's in keeping with the present area, alongside the fact that the development's actually uphill, which is going to have excess detriment on the properties anyway. It looks out of keeping to the street scene. So I would be minded to object to this present application on those grounds.
Okay, Councillor Donoghue, are you making a recommendation to that effect? Right. Well, we're still very early in, so we made a note of that. Councillor Hull, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question to begin with. Condition 4 Oh, sorry. One question. What is the distance between number 7 and the and number 9 in terms of the boundary? I did visit Greenacre. I did see that you can see on that particular drawing the distance between Greenacre and the first of the proposed houses is a lot smaller than the distance between the second block of houses and the row of 4 terraced houses over there. When you're inside number 7, you can see how close the existing bungalow is. And I'm told that the new development, the first of the blocks on the left there, will follow the same building line as is currently with the existing bungalow. And to my mind, that's really, really too close. Looking at the revised plans, I appreciate that the height has been reduced, and I appreciate that the roof is now hit, which helps enormously. But the side wall, can you go back to that plan, please? That drawing? The drawing on the hill? Okay. Now, if you look at the Greenacre as a bungalow, when you're putting a house next to it, it's double the size of a bungalow. That's what a house is. It's got an extra floor and it's got the roof. However, because it's on such a slope, on a hill, that looks a lot higher than it really is. It is. That's a very, very steep hill, and you're doubling, in my opinion, you're doubling the size of a building. So at the moment, I believe it's overshadowing. It's overshadowing onto a bungalow. You put a house there and it's double the size. There is just one other point. Condition 4 says that the window on the first floor elevation of the proposed dwelling shall be permanent fixed shut with top light opening. So I'm not clear. Is it fixed shut or is it top light opening? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hull. Query about the condition for the window.
Okay. I think there's a couple of questions there, I believe. First, the obscure glazed window condition it is fixed shut with the exception of a top light, so a small top light opening only obscure glazed window, which would be above sort of head high above the sort of 1.7 metre high from ground floor level. And the whole window would be obscure glazed. Was it the distance to the separation distance between the bungalow and the first of the properties? There was I believe it's 3.3 metres separation to the boundary, and then the proposal is a further 0.9 metres from the common boundary. So away from that actual boundary. So it'd be between the two sort of built forms, it would be looking at sort of 4.2 metres, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other speakers on this? Councillor Edwards.
First of all, a question, Chairman. What is the difference in the ridge height of the proposed new house compared with the bungalow at Greenacres?
That's a good one.
Chairman, bearing in mind that the site is on a slope, what I will do is take a height from effectively DPC level rather than ground level, because it varies obviously, but from DPC level the height of the bungalow is shown at, when he finds the right scale, Shown at approximately 5.7 metres, Chairman. Yeah, and the houses are proposed to be 8.5 metres to the ridge.
So 5.7 metres to 8.5 metres is the difference. Okay, do you want to come back on that? Or?
Please,
Yeah.
thank you. That's quite a difference in the ridge height. I mean, that's a difference of 2.8 metres, and I think, if I understand Mr. Pegram correctly, that's not taking into account the slope of Felder Avenue. So, in fact, the difference in the height will be greater. Am I correct in that assumption?
Is Councillor Edwards correct?
Yes,
in that?
Chairman, I think it's fair to say
Is
if you look at this corner of the bungalow, I measured to DPC level. If you go across, DPC level is roughly at sort of just above ground level at that point. Those properties are on higher ground, so yes, there would be, if you like, exacerbating the difference in the height.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And in other words, just on a rounding up basis, the difference in height is going to be approximately 3 metres, which is considerable, given that the separation distance between the properties, I understand, is only 3.3 metres. Consequently, Chairman, I am in agreement with what Councillor Donoghue was saying, and I would therefore move that the application be rejected on the grounds of overbearing and loss of light on the habitable rooms at Green Acres. We've seen the interior shots. I accept the point that they're not, that those windows that face onto the existing property are not the only windows in that room, but they are considerable amount of glazing that must affect the people who live there and the habitable rooms, and therefore it's a detriment to their amenity. But the reason is overbearing and loss of light on the habitable rooms. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Now, in actual fact, Councillor Donoghue moved a similar recommendation, and I was going to ask her to clarify. If you're moving a recommendation, you need to clarify what your reasons are. And Councillor Edwards, I think you've possibly just done that. So can we say formally you're moving a recommendation on those, for those reasons, and you're seconding? Are you happy with that? Do you want to come any more clarification and before we have any more comments?
Chairman, just to also, Councillor Donoghue did talk about a reason relating to design in the street scene. And again, similar to you, seek clarification whether that is potentially to focus as a reason for refusal.
So, would you want to include that as one of your reasons? Oh, right, on street scene. Okay, thank you. We'd also got a couple of other speakers on this already. Also, sorry, yes, Councillor Edwards, do you agree with that?
I've learnt on this committee, Chairman, that there's always a temptation to throw as many reasons as possible. I'm well aware that it's that one reason that's a material reason is sufficient to refuse a planning application and for that to be defended. I personally, without wanting to sort of disagree with Councillor Donoghue, I would tend not to include that supplementary one because it's a much more a matter of opinion rather than the facts that we have on ridge height, separation distances, habitable rooms, which are objective rather than subjective. So I would hope that perhaps Councillor Donoghue may not wish to pursue that one.
Councillor Donoghue, would you like to?
The main reasons for my objecting are the two former reasons which Councillor Edwards has agreed with, so I'm happy with that.
So
Thank you.
We're clear on those as reasons.
Chairman, I thank Councillor Edwards again for doing what I was going to say.
Right, thank you. Now, I've got Councillor Bushman and Malinder indicated. Councillor Bushman, do you want to?
There was just one question that I believe that Councillor Edwards has half answered my question. And could we go back to the picture where we're looking from the lounge of Greenacres, please? Now, looking through that first window, it appears to me, is that a fence or is that part of a building?
That's the neighbouring bungalow next door on the application site. You
Oh,
mean
no,
through
this- yes,
here?
existing bungalow.
Yes, that.
Yeah, that's
yes.
the existing bungalow on the application site.
Right, and that's the one that's going to be removed?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Malinder.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask, I mean, I don't know whether you'll be able to answer this, and it's a bit unfortunate, really, that we can't ask the objector and people who would actually know the answer to this, but I was going to ask the 12 or more trees that have already been felled, what size were they, what species were they, and where were they? I don't know whether the planning officers may know the answers to those questions, but also, well, hopefully, I was also going to say that I would second Councillor Donohue's proposal. So if hopefully that will go through. If not, I think we do need a condition about planting, because if there are more than 12 trees that have already been felled, then I see no condition that says anything about replacements of trees or any landscaping plan. So that was my first point. My other point was, I know we do have loss of light as amenity value to the rooms, but I do think that affecting the solar panels does cause a lack of amenity to the neighbours. And considering that Rushcliffe has a climate change policy, I quote, "Rushcliffe Borough Council is committed to tackling climate change and to making a major contribution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. As a local authority, we're working to reduce Rushcliffe's carbon footprint by using planning and other policy levers to ensure that buildings and local infrastructure are energy efficient." So I have actually added some suggestions to the local plan part 2 to say that solar panels should be a material planning consideration, amongst other things, and also things about trees. So hopefully in the future this will be a material consideration in this council, and I shall be very upset if it isn't. So I do wonder whether we could mention that lack of loss of amenity to the neighbours in view of the solar panels.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Malinder. Well, the solar panels are a new area for us. Is there anything? Can you add anything?
Chairman, I'm well aware of the council's objectives and priorities. What I said was I am not aware yet of a case where planning permission has been refused and gone to appeal because of an impact on solar panels. Clearly, your job as decision makers is to consider the impact of proposals on, amongst other things, the amenities of neighbouring properties. Clearly, I acknowledge that if that does overshadow those solar panels, there may be a financial consideration. Again, similar to devaluation of property, that's not a material planning consideration in my opinion. I think the area that I would seek clarification on from any future case law, if you like, or I would refer to, is how does overshadowing the solar panels affect someone's amenities? I put that question out there because at the moment, Chairman, I don't know the answer. As I say, it's an area which hasn't yet been challenged, if you like.
Thank you. And the comment about the trees, there is reference to trees and planting in paragraph 6, in condition number 6. I don't think we can say how many trees have been removed. We probably don't know that, do we? But in terms of future planting, it refers to a requirement for
Yes,
landscaping scheme and also protection for 5 years from development if anything dies.
Yes, but apparently there have already been more 13 plus or 12 plus felled. So this is a problem. I realise the law is not good in this sense, because there has to be a tree preservation order. In order to get to tree preservation order, the tree has to be under threat, and we don't know whether the tree is under threat until someone goes out there with an axe. So it is a very difficult situation. But yes, I didn't notice that, I must admit, so I apologise.
Okay, thank you. Well, as ever, we can talk about future possible legislation and all the rest of it, but we can only work on what there is at the moment. Do we have any other speakers? I think we'll go to a vote then. We've got a proposal to refuse planning permission for reasons given, and duly seconded. I think we better have a show of hands, please. Those in favour of the recommendation to refuse, can we show, please? This is the revised motion to refuse planning permission as nominated by Councillor Donoghue and seconded by Councillor Edwards. A show of hands in favour of that, please. How many is that? 7, and those against? 4. So permission is refused on for the reasons given. Thank you very much. We'll now go on to our next application, which is Keyworth again. This is land southwest of 98 Nicker Hill. It's the proposed erection of a new dwelling, and Mr. Pennington again, please.
Okay. The application relates to an area of garden land to the rear of 98 Nicker Hill, and the proposal it's proposed to use the access off of Mount Pleasant in between numbers 182 and 184, and you can see on the site location plan the proposed location of the dwelling. This is the aerial shot of the site. At the moment it forms bottom, sort of the rear garden area at 98 Nicker Hill, and the red line you can see includes sort of the access area onto Mount Pleasant, both in front of the site and in front of number 184 Mount Pleasant. Coming to the photographs now, taken from Mount Pleasant. That's looking towards the proposed site, where the location of the access is proposed, in between the two properties as mentioned at number 182 and 184. This is further along Mount Pleasant, sort of looking back across towards the access, and inside the proposal site now, looking back out towards facing Mount Pleasant with the side gables of the two properties each side there. Looking more towards the side gable there of number 182 Mount Pleasant, and then to number 184. This is looking sort of from the rear of the site, so looking towards the sort of the rear boundary, some further residential properties in that top corner there. But this is effectively sort of looking at what would be the proposed garden area of the proposed dwelling, and this is looking back up towards the host dwelling on Nicker Hill, also standing from the proposal site. Coming to the plans now, just sort of making out the position of the dwelling in the middle of the plot, and there's a 13-metre separation distance to the rear boundary, and sort of looking closer in This plan was an additional plan requested, so showing what would call a sort of turning area at the front of the site. The proposal's got sort of a relatively large driveway, so this is showing that you can sort of turn within the site and enter out onto Mount Pleasant in a forward direction. Also showing sort of the outlines of the trees that have been retained along the boundaries. Given the proposal uses part of what is as existing 184's front driveway, this shows the sort of what the proposed arrangement would be, showing that sort of 184 would still be able to retain suitable off-street parking in addition to the off-street parking that's proposed. Coming towards the proposed elevation or drawings and floor plans, as sort of part of the design, there's a sort of a large first floor glazed sort of landing area proposed sort of there. You can see there on that front elevation. So also the rear elevation similar proposed as well. The actual height. Going to the next. Oops. So the actual height is slightly lower than the existing properties on Mount Pleasant, and given its set back sort of from the building line along there, it would the proposal as viewed from Mount Pleasant would be lower in height than those existing properties, thereby sort of reducing the sort of visual impact of the proposal when viewed from the street scene. Other than the sort of additional drawing that shows the turning area within the site, there were no amended plans requested. So the proposal as it stands there before you, for the dwelling is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have speakers on this agenda item as well. We have Mr. Neil, who is an objector, and also Councillor Edivine, who is one of the ward councillors. So, Mr. Neil, are you here? And you probably saw what happened before. As soon as you're ready, right-hand button, the light will come on. We'll have up to 5 minutes. Okay, thank you.
Okay, you have seen that there's a lot of concern and emotion that has been created by the proposed planning application for 98 Nicker Hill, many of which have been echoed on the written responses on the planning website. We feel that there are a number of valid objections that would cause for the planning permission to be declined. In fact, we believe that the granting of permission would be contrary to the guidance given in the National Planning Policy Framework. The building of this property with a joint access road from Mount Pleasant would have a significant adverse effect upon the amenity, particularly residential amenity of adjoining properties and the surrounding area by reason of type and levels of activity on the site or traffic generated, vehicle movements and other noise and activity associated with a domestic dwelling in such close proximity and from the otherwise quite rare garden areas would be harmful to the amenity of the occupiers. In addition, we believe it's an unnecessary form of development that's to be overbearing in relation to the neighbouring properties with a significant loss of privacy to existing adjacent properties. The size and location and access to the site is such that its development would detrimentally affect the character or pattern of the surrounding area. This would create a dangerous precedent for properties on Nicker Hill to consider using any of their 12 properties that back onto these properties Nicker Hill to be considered for use as access to their gardens for ongoing backfilling in the future. A significant concern for the current tenants on this part of Mount Pleasant is the access and parking of what is already a busy corner. The proposed access is an outside bend in the road where parking is already at a premium, and because of this we frequently have people parking on the visibility display direct opposite. This restricts visibility around this bend, which puts other road users and pedestrians in danger, especially as cars have to approach this bend on the opposite side of the road due to the number of residents parking their cars on the road outside of their property. The Highway Authority stated that as this access is on a bend, vehicle speeds should be low. However, as many of the local residents will testify, it is part of the road termed as the loop, with a double bend which some drivers try and take this corner as fast as they can. Widening the entrance to the driveway will remove one of the on-street car parking spaces, and this space is used on a daily basis to park a business vehicle. This will decrease the number of spaces down to one on-street car parking space between 5 properties, thus having a knock-on effect along the street, compacting the issue of parking and increasing the distance for drivers having to approach this corner on the wrong side of the road. This together will need to connect utilities from Mount Pleasant, where further narrowing of the corner would leave it to be significantly dangerous at peak times. The plan shows that the existing property at number 184 will have space for 3 cars. We think that is unlikely without blocking access for the new property, as the driveway narrows considerably towards the road, and it's more likely that only 1 car will be able to park safely accommodated. From a personal point of view, being an adjacent neighbour, we are also concerned about the angle for vehicles turning into the proposed access, particularly during construction, as they will undoubtedly cut across the bottom of our property, potentially causing damage. Despite the developer proposing to do most of the work himself and to do 1 drop-off of materials, there will undoubtedly be many other construction professionals required to build this property, and many more deliveries made further down the line. This is a compacted area already, so this will surely lead to an increase in traffic. Parked right roadside, not to mention noise and disturbance to what is currently a sedate and well-established community. While most houses in this area have means to park 2 vehicles on their driveway, most households have more than 2 cars, plus business vehicles that need to be accommodated. The flood report mentions a preferred method of infiltration of the removal of water. However, as indicated in our line note, our garden is at a lower level than a property at 98 Nick Hill. Not infiltrate through the clay. As the current owners of the property immediately adjacent to the proposed site, we are concerned over the reduction in privacy that this development will bring. The size of the proposed building will be overbearing, not only to our own property, but also to number 184, which is presently owned by the owners of 98 Nicker Hill. We are currently surrounded by residential. If this property is to be built and planning permission granted, the vast majority of residents would only be accepting this access from Nicker Hill, not facilitated by the purchase of a property on Mount Pleasant and creation of a shared access drive where there will be 3 other properties on Nicker Hill that could see this as a potential opportunity in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. That was, again, bang on 5 minutes. So thank you very much, and very clear as well. We have Councillor Eddivine, please.
Right. Thank you, Chairman. I've objected to this application on a number of levels following representations from neighbours. And whilst I accept that many of the objections are not valid in planning terms, I do believe this application has some fundamental flaws. Firstly, it is not dissimilar to an application rejected about a year ago by this committee on Nicker Hill. And whilst every application should be taken on its own merit, the reasons for the previous rejection are significant in this case. I would like to read out the decision notice of the previous case, as I believe the current application recommendation is not only against policy, but inconsistent with the previous disallowed application, which read like this. The existing property at Nicker Hill currently enjoys a generous amount of amenity space, which is in keeping with the spacious character of development in the surrounding area, that is generally characterised by properties situated within sizable curtilages. The previous application rejection went on to say, the backland form of development proposed would detrimentally affect the pattern of development in the surrounding area and create a precedent for similar inappropriate development. The proposal would therefore be contrary to Policy 10 of the core strategy, which states that all new development should be designed to make a positive contribution to the public realm and sense of place. And I ask, why is this application any different? This proposal is, as you can see, not accessed from Nicker Hill, but accesses the land from Mount Pleasant. I believe this is also contrary to Policy HOU2 of the Rushcliffe Non-Statutory Replacement Plan, which states that planning permission for new unallocated development will be granted provided that the size and location of the site would not detrimentally affect the character or pattern of the surrounding area or the settlement as a whole. This is a large 4-bedroomed house accessed through a narrow gap, surrounded, if granted, by 60s and 70s semi-detached housing, which I find completely at odds with the surrounding properties. Finally, I would like the committee to consider the site access plans. Please look carefully at the 2 site plan drawings that were shown in the presentation. The first one, submitted on the 7th of November, is inaccurate, as it does not show the garage at number 184 Mount Pleasant correctly, nor does it show the boundary to the side of 182 correctly. What it does show is 3 very small cars in the garden of 184, and a split driveway to 2 much larger cars in the grounds of the proposed plot. The revised plan, I believe, is accurate, but please look carefully at the curtilage shown by the red line. Number 184 has now has no land in the front, and access can only be gained by permission of the new dwelling to both the garage and their front door. Whether this access is granted or not, I fail to see how this cannot have a severely detrimental impact on the amenity of the house at 184. This has only been proposed as 184, as previously stated, is currently owned by the existing Nicker Hill property owner who would like to sell the bottom of their garden. In the future, ownership will undoubtedly change, and the loss of amenity to 184 will be, in my mind, catastrophic.
Okay, thank you. Could you just turn the microphone? Super, thank you. Thank you very much. So we heard from Mr. Neal and Councillor Edivine, who have concerns, a lot of concerns about traffic on Mount Pleasant, impact on neighbouring properties and amenity on neighbouring properties, regards the design and idea as being overbearing, and also that we heard about flooding and drain concerns as well. Councillor Edivine also referred to another application, as he quite rightly says there, we can only discuss the current one, but we heard your comments on that. Mr. Pegram, are you picking up on this?
Yeah, Chad, just a couple of points of clarification. Just to pick up on the issue of the what would be owned or retained with 184. Planning application plans do not determine ownership of land. Clearly that's a matter for conveyancing. The reason, in fact, that this plan shows the front garden, the entire front garden within the red line, was at our request, Chairman, principally because we wanted to impose a condition, which is in the recommended conditions number 10, which required the provision of parking to be retained for number 184. So don't be misled, that's not suggesting that 184 would have no front garden. That's a conveyancing issue. This is purely a planning matter that in order to impose that condition, we need the area within the red line. So that's the explanation as to why it shows it within the red line. In terms of what arrangements would be made for access to the site over this frontage and maintaining access to 184, that's a matter for the parties involved to sort out through conveyancing. The garage to 184 is incidentally here, so clearly, as well as the parking spaces that are proposed here, one would imagine they would have to negotiate an access to their garage over the driveway. So hopefully, Chairman, that provides some explanation on that point. The issue about the drainage, the comments we received from the lead local flood authority provided some guidance on how drainage should be provided here. Now, in terms of sustainable urban drainage, Chairman, there's a hierarchical approach, which its preference is for infiltration i.e. soakaways, or to a watercourse. And if neither of those are acceptable, then it would be to a surface water drain in the area. So we are not saying it has to be by infiltration. That is the policy position in terms of sustainable urban drainage. Clearly, they would have to get building regulations approval, and part of that would include, if they proposed soakaways, an infiltration test within the site. We're not proposing that that should be conditioned as part of the planning permission. We are suggesting that that's an informative, drawing the applicant's attention to the preferred methods of drainage, subject to satisfying technical requirements, obviously. I think probably, Chairman, oh yes, I will pick up in terms of the reference to the other permission. There are some significant differences with this proposal to that one. I will take this question, Chairman, because Mr. Pennington doesn't know the details of that other permission. But basically, if I use this as an example, the proposal that Councillor Redivine referred to was a dwelling in the back garden of the property with an access down the side of the existing property onto Nicker Hill. Clearly, we found that unacceptable in terms of classic tandem development. There was overlooking issues in that instance, and it did reduce the garden area to the host property quite significantly. In this instance, Chairman, clearly you can see that the existing property retains quite a substantial garden, not dissimilar to neighbouring properties, and gains a separate access from a frontage of a neighbouring road. Clearly, Chairman, the general advice, though, is each case is on its merits. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. And I have Councillor Mrs. Smith, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think your Vice Chairman will probably know the property I'm going to refer to. At Bingham, I think it was on Cherry Street, which had an application for a building in the rear garden, and the driveway went so close to the host property that we rejected it, and I think it was upheld at appeal. I am concerned, okay, 184 is owned by the applicant for now. What is going to happen? I can see endless disputes and great difficulty for any potential purchaser of 184. I think it's definitely detrimental to their amenity. So I would object on those grounds.
Okay, right, thank you. So are you formally
Yes,
making
I
a
will.
proposal or objection on that? And the
Yeah.
reason being to clarify?
It's detrimental to the occupants in the future, presumably. I don't know whether anybody's living there now, but it will be detrimental to any future owner of that property.
And in what sort of harm do you think it would be?
Oh,
In
they're
what way
going
would it be
to have
detrimental?
cars passing down there, very close to that property, and I think that's harming their amenity.
Okay, got that. Right, thank you very much. Right, Councillor Hull indicated to speak, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you go back to the drawing with the 3 cars on the drive, please? That's the one. So, am I right in saying that the access in front of 184, it will all be level, so therefore any vehicle wanting to get into this new property has the right, if cars aren't parked in that particular area, has the right to actually go over? Is there going to be a hard border, a hard boundary between 184 and this, or is it all going to be flat and block paved so that any vehicle can actually go over it on its way to the site, please?
We're just looking at the maps.
There'll be no such sort of physical barrier separating the two driveways as such. It'll be, the land level will remain as is existing. So it, in effect, it would remain as shown on that photograph. It would remain as is shown. And there'll be no sort of physical barriers or separations between the two properties either.
Okay, Mr. Pegram, you want to add to that?
Yeah, Chairman, just to add to that, clearly you can see the existing driveway to the 184. You can see the neighbouring driveway at 182. There's no hard boundary between the two there. There is, it's level. I would imagine, Chairman, we haven't got these details at the moment, but I would imagine that effectively this area of grass would be paved over similarly to the driveway, and it would be a matter of conveyancing and courtesy to make sure that the access to each other's property is maintained.
Councillor Hull?
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Pegram. So therefore, we can assume, therefore, then if 3 cars do park, as indicated in that drawing, there is still room for a vehicle or an ambulance or a fire engine to get into this proposal site.
Which one? Yes, a car could certainly get through, Chairman. By my reckoning, I would say an ambulance could probably get through. Fire engine, not sure. I haven't measured it on the plans. Normally, the requirement for a fire engine clearance is 3.7 metres. However, Chairman, they generally need to get within 45 metres of the site of the dwelling where the fire is. Quite possible there may be that distance achievable from standing on the public highway.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs. Mayles.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, excuse me, I thoroughly agree with Mr. Neil and Councillor Edivine with all their comments. In fact, they're the ones that I personally have chosen to, on reading the agenda. I just think that this is not an ideal situation. Coming out onto a corner, and I should imagine they have the same problem there, parking on the street scene. There must be children in the area. 20 people have objected, and there's probably more as well. We have some people sitting here. And I do believe Councillor Smith has proposed an objection. Am I right?
Yes, you are correct.
I will second that one.
Right, and again, to clarify the reasons for your suggested refusal is we had amenity and impact on 184 in particular.
We've got proposal for refusal from Councillor Smith, Chairman, on grounds of impact on the amenity of neighbouring property, and I've got that as principally from vehicle movements to and from the new dwelling.
Yeah.
If the intention was to put 3 cars in front of 184, they're going to be right up to their front window, presumably.
Well, we have the reasons, don't we? Which. So we have. I think we have at least one reason, which is required to give a reason for refusal. Yeah.
Chairman, just on that point, again, I preface this by saying every case on its merits. I have found the permission for the site in Cherry Street. It did have, in my view, a more constrained access arrangement. However, Chairman, according to our records, if I've got the right one and the same one, it was a dwelling behind the property on Cherry Street with a driveway down the side. That was approved and built.
Well, let's concentrate on this application. I think we can only do that. Councillor Bushman, please.
Could we just have that photograph up again showing the 3 cars in front of 184, please? I'd like to see the photograph, the actual photograph of the property, 184, with the tree in front of it. Right. Effectively, what the owner and applicant is suggesting to the occupants of 184, whether he owns it or not, is to have a car park in front of the house, covering all of that grass. Now, I see that there could be a serious problem with regards to that tree that's there. It looks like a leylandii to me, but I wouldn't be surprised if that comes down. Because effectively, if you're going to have 3 cars parking in front of 184, then there's going to be a problem with regards to access onto that grass area. Therefore, I would certainly join those who want to refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor Bushman. Councillor Stockwood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. There were multiple applications at Cherry Street, and eventually the application was passed. And it was a very particular example of backland development. And you're quite right. It was objected to on a number of occasions, but eventually, with appropriate landscaping, screening, etc., it was adopted. I'd just like to look at this picture and the unfortunately small three-car picture, but we're going to start with this one. Looking at that picture before me, I can see that the neighbouring property has block paving all across their frontage and is parking vehicles on that frontage all the way across. So I don't think parking vehicles on a frontage on block paving across the front of a property is out of keeping with this area. With regards to the three small cars in the picture that is being looked at, I just remind councillors that condition 10 is for a minimum of 2 parking spaces, and that we're looking at an application which says 184 will maintain 2 car parking spaces in the future. So the fact that they've chosen to provide the drawing with 3 obviously smaller cars and 2 big cars next to their new property, well, that's just a very nice picture, but it's not actually what we're considering before us tonight. The application before us is for there would be 2 parking spaces at 184, and councillors would consider, is there sufficient space when you look at that picture of 182 and the neighbouring property in 184, is there going to be sufficient space for 2 cars if they block pave the driveway at the front of the property? So I think those are just 2 points I'd like to raise. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Stockwood. Nothing to come back on that at this stage. Councillor Malinder, please.
Thank you, Chair. Could you go back to the photograph, please, of number 184? Could someone tell me, is that a garage? Yes. Right, so, okay, can you explain to me how I think the amenities of 184 are affected in that they're not going to be able to park anything in their garage because there's no longer any access to it? Is that correct? Because it looks certainly like that on the picture, and
access to the garage.
Chairman, to reiterate the point I made earlier, effectively the driveway, let's go back to the picture, the existing driveway, yes, would become a shared access to the application site, and as far as I am aware, I've not been made aware to the contrary, the garage would be retained. So effectively this comes back to the issue of conveyancing and rights of way, where if this were to be built in the form shown, they would have to make arrangements for right of access over the driveway, so they would have the 2 parking spaces here, as you've seen in the image, and access into the new dwelling and access into the garage. So the access would be maintained effectively over the access to the development.
So can you turn your... So does that gives a bit more clarity? You're looking at longer term conveyancing matters between neighbours as such. Did I see another hand go? Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been looking at this and listening to the debate very carefully. This is quite a large building plot, and a substantial house is going to be put on it. It's going to be well back from the existing street scene. The impact on the street scene of Mount Pleasant, I think, is going to be minimal, particularly as the ridge height of the new property is not going to be any greater than existing properties on the road. It's not an ideal set of circumstances because of the difficulties of the driveways, which has been rehearsed here. I just don't feel, Chairman, that if we were to refuse this application, that the arguments are sufficiently strong to put before an independent inspector, and I have little expectation that an independent inspector would support a refusal. So I'm afraid I can't support the existing motion, although I'm not exactly happy with the application, I don't think we've got the grounds to refuse it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. And, as ever, we have to look at planning facts and rules and all the rest of it. I don't think we have any other speakers unless there's anyone else wanted to speak. Councillor Donoghue.
Could you just clarify for me the existing street parking situation? Just is there a photograph or... right. Thank you. Thank you.
Is that it?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other speakers on this, or no? Well, we have we've had a recommendation moved and seconded to refuse permission for reasons given, amenity, and in particular concerns about the access. I think are the main points on that. Unless anyone else wishes to say anything, shall we go to a vote? So I need a show of hands for those in favour of the revised recommendation to refuse permission for the reasons given. So if we have a show of hands for that, please. Six. And those against that recommendation, please show. So that's how many? Five. So the motion is 1. So permission is refused for the reasons given. Yes? Okay. Thank you. The musical chairs going on now. So. Right. So, shall we move on to our next application, please, which is 63 Moor Lane, Gotham. And this is a resubmission for development of one detached dwelling with new access. It's outline application with all matters reserved except for access. And Mr. Pennington again, please.
Thank you. So yeah, this is, as mentioned, this is a resubmission online application with all matters reserved other than access for one dwelling on Moor Lane in Gotham. The main difference between this application and the previous application, which was refused, is the red line boundary has been adjusted to just show the access area at the front. Previously, the red line included the whole of the frontage of the site to the right of the house dwelling, which is number 63 Moor Lane. Here's the aerial photograph of the site showing the sort of house dwelling in number 63 there on the left, and this and the plot. This is a dwelling and a cattery are on the other side. And now coming on to the photographs, this is taken from Moor Lane, looking towards the site. There's sort of high boundary trees and hedges to sort of to the side, to the rear, and there's also sort of high boundary trees to the front as well. Again, taken from Moor Lane. This is looking almost through the front trees, looking towards the house dwelling at number 63, and this is taken from the access to number 63, just further along Moor Lane, and again looking sort of in towards the site from the road. This is looking further east further down Moor Lane, sort of heading out to the village of Gotham, and coming to the location plan. This is the proposed, which is as it's an outline application, this is an indicative plan only, showing the outline of the proposed dwelling, sort of similar sort of size and setup as the existing dwelling. And then showing some buildings sort of further to the east, which is an existing house, and Cattery further along Moor Lane. Looking the other way, these are a row of semi-detached properties, also along Moor Lane, towards the west of the site. The property, as mentioned in the report, is within the green belt, which was the original reason for refusal from the previous application. Gotham itself, in the green belt review, is proposed to be inset or taken out of being in the green belt. So this sort of map shows the area, sort of the main area of Gotham as such, that's going to be taken out of the green belt. So predominantly the village itself. The application site is just here, which is, as you can see, is on the edge of the village. It's proposed to stay within the green belt, as it still forms part of the sort of open countryside, sort of on the edge of the village, rather than within the sort of built form of the village, which is due to be taken out of the green belt. Effectively, yeah. Yeah, and so back to this, as mentioned, this is an outline application. So we're dealing predominantly with the principle of residential development on this plot and impacts on the green belt. As with the previous application that was went to committee at the end of last year, the recommendation is for refusal based on the impact on the green belt. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pennington. And we have a speaker on this item as well. This is Mr. Horner, please. I think you've done this before, haven't you? Yes. So, oh. And just really, I have to confirm, up to 5 minutes, and as soon as you're ready. Right. So as soon as you're ready, red button, and the clock will start counting down. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
And we've got your handouts now. Everyone's got them.
Good evening again, councillors. In view of how close the decision was last time our application was heard, we were advised to revise it and resubmit. As the size of the plot was the reason for the refusal last time, we changed the development line so the plot is now a mirror image of the curtilage of the host property and is 45% smaller than the original application. You can see that from the sketch in the handout. The site is in the greenbelt, so the decision hinges on whether it meets the exception for limited infilling in villages and is therefore appropriate development. We are sure it does. At last meeting, we referenced an important piece of case law about the interpretation of appropriate versus inappropriate development. This shows how decision makers should treat all of the exception cases. To quote, inappropriate development in the greenbelt is development by definition harmful to the greenbelt, harmful because it is there, whereas development in the accepted categories in the NPPF is not. This is clearly about all of the accepted categories, as it says, not just the exception for agricultural development, as was suggested last time. In case you're interested, there are a number of copies of the judgment if you want to look at those. So if you agree that our case meets the exception for limited infilling in the village of Gotham, then it is appropriate development and should not be seen to do harm to the greenbelt or openness. It's also worth pointing out that the exception doesn't have any qualifications on, for example, the size of the plot or location in the village. It simply says limited infilling in villages. The proposal is clearly limited. It's for one dwelling. There was a lot of discussion last time about the plot size, which was given as the reason for that the proposal was recommended for refusal. And even though we heard there were no policies suggesting that there are no policies giving specific measurements for gap sizes in terms of what is deemed to be limited infilling or what is not. So is it infill? It's certainly between buildings. Given there's not much policy guidance here, does it look like infill? We'd say it does. You can see from the sketch that it's a house-sized plot with a layout very similar to the layout of number 63. Any other combination of plot size or layout would obviously not look right. On this basis, there really doesn't appear to be any clear reasons for finding that it isn't infill. We've also shown in our planning statement the proposal meets the residential design guidelines as well as the glossary explanation for infill development. On to the next aspect. Is it in the village? Well, we thought so. Imagine our surprise then when last night at 5 o'clock we read in the late representation report that there was a new reason for refusal, namely the site is not in the village. This sent us scrabbling through the report to find out how anyone could come to this conclusion. It seems to be based on the statements that the site sits outside the main built-up part of the settlement. It is on the edge of the village, although nowhere are these stated as clear reasons for refusal. According to these measures, where we now live is no longer in Gotham. I'd even bet some of your homes are no longer in the villages you thought you always lived in. It's self-evident that not all houses in a city are in the city centre. Likewise, not all houses in a village are in the main centre. Obviously, they can't be all in the main built-up part, and quite a lot have to be on the edge of the village. In fact, if you look at Gotham, which you can see, about 25% of it would not be in the village on this basis. In contrast to those statements, the report also states that there are 4 more dwellings to the east before entering the open countryside. So if it's not in the open countryside, logic dictates it must be in the village. As I'm sure you're aware or would have guessed, there is case law which has discussed this for decision makers. This says that development lines do not define village boundaries. It says that decision makers have to base their decision on the ground. Maybe some of you know Moor Lane, but if not, we think the map in the handout on the other side is enough to show that the site is very much in the village. It's as close to the village centre as the school, the doctor's surgery. It's much closer to the centre than the houses on Hill Road to the south, and much of the village to the north. So the site is obviously in the village, and there are no clear reasons why not. In conclusion, this site is an eminently sustainable and deliverable proposal. It's a short walk to the local amenities, the pubs, shop, church, bus stops. Rushcliffe core strategy says that when considering proposals, the council will take a positive approach, and that reflects the national policy of presumption in favour of sustainable development. Taking such a positive approach, we're sure that you'll find our proposal is infill, and it is in the village, and is therefore appropriate development. In which case, as we've seen earlier from the case law, there is no need to further consider the effects of the proposal on the green belt or openness. So I hope, councillors, that you'll be able to see the true merits of our application and grant us planning permission for our proposal. 4 seconds.
Yes.
And a bit of a mush in the middle.
Sometimes it seems like forever, 5 minutes. Sometimes it's over in a few seconds. So, but thank you, very clear, and we have your handouts. Thank you. So that's the only speaker on this item. Mr. Horner, who is the applicant, has explained why he feels that the revised application can be justified and meeting Greenbelt rules, and also refers to being in the village. Who's coming back on this? Mr. Pegram, are you coming back on this, please? Thank you.
Chairman, this is a difficult one, I guess, in some respects. Just to pick up on the positive and proactive approach to planning, we are encouraged by government to operate positively and proactively and find ways to say effectively yes rather than no when dealing with planning applications. However, Chairman, being positive does not mean approving every single application. Clearly that would not be possible, and there'd be no point to the planning system if every application was just approved on the basis of a positive approach to planning. The crux of this one is Greenbelt policy, Chairman. The site is within the Greenbelt, so that is the starting point for the consideration of this application. Paragraph 145 of the NPPF tells us that new buildings in the Greenbelt are inappropriate development. The policy tells us that inappropriate development is harmful by definition. So that is the starting point for the consideration of any application in the Greenbelt. There is case law that deals with the issue of Greenbelt policy. Quite recent, I think it's 2016, there's been other cases and appeals which have, to a certain extent, changed the approach and interpretation to Greenbelt policy. And what that says is if it's not inappropriate, then you don't need to consider impact on openness. because clearly it's effectively appropriate development. That is the whole crux of this, Chairman. Is this inappropriate development or is it not inappropriate development? Again, case law tells us that the list in paragraph 145 of the NPPF is a closed list. So new buildings in the Greenbelt are inappropriate unless they satisfy one of the exceptions within that list. Included in that list amongst buildings for agriculture are limited, or is, I should say, limited infilling in villages. So the question here, Chairman, first and foremost is it limited infilling? And there is no definition in any of the policy documents of what limited infilling constitutes. The other issue is it in the village? So even if it was limited infilling, the policy position in paragraph 145 is it has to be limited infilling in the village. The fact that we are saying this is not in the village doesn't mean it's not in Gotham, it's on the edge of the village. And again, there is case law which confirms that dwellings which are not necessarily in amongst the built-up part of the village are on the edge of villages and can therefore be determined as inappropriate development. That is the whole crux of this, Chairman, and really clearly members refused an application in October last year. The only difference to this proposal is a change to the red line boundary, which effectively removes the front garden area of the property from the application site. That area is currently domestic garden area, so one would surmise that even if the dwelling was built, that garden area could be used by the proposed dwelling. Ignoring that fact, Chairman, the crux of this is, in your officer's opinion, this is inappropriate because it's not infilling in the village. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Right, we can open up to discuss, please. Who would like to start on this? Right. Councillor Hetherington. Right, thank you.
Well, I don't really personally think there's a significant difference between what we're proposing today than what we actually went on last time, because this is very much on the outside of the village and in the Greenbelt area, and somewhere you have to have a barrier between the operational part of, if you like, the city part of the village and the actual agricultural part of the village. And this is right on the edge of the agricultural part of the village. And I don't think there's been enough justification to actually change what we did last time, personally. That's my view. And I would support that if anybody wants to back me up on it.
Thank you, Councillor Hetherington. So I sense are you making a moving a proposal recommendation as per the report? Right. Have you got a seconder at this stage? Is it, Councillor Edwards, would you like to speak on this?
Just very briefly, Chairman. I think the points that have been made by the officer are the same as those that were made last time. There's very little change to this application, and I see no compelling reason. There's no new evidence brought forward to suggest we should change our opinion. So I second Councillor Hetherington in approving the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at the plan of the area that came with the papers, and if we were talking about an application for the land to the east of 99 Moor Lane, I wouldn't have any problem with agreeing with the recommendation. But you could see the other property from one of the photos that's beyond, I don't know what number it is, roofs, that bit. There's all sorts of roofs in that area. And there's a house there. There's 3 more houses beyond. And, okay, it's Greenbelt, but I still think it's infilling. It looks perfectly okay to me.
That's fine. That's what we're here for. People will have different views and opinions, and that's debate democracy, isn't it? So don't feel guilty or anything about having different views. That's That's the whole idea. Interpret and understand the rules and planning laws and all the rest of it. That's otherwise not much point being here, is there really? But thank you for that. And Councillor Thurman, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I agree with Councillor Smith. I mean, it can't be anything else but infill, surely to goodness. I mean, as she said, if it were the end of the string of the rest of the houses, then it'd be a different story. But it's right in between, and you know, I can't see a problem with it whatsoever. And as for those little buildings that she mentioned, they're virtually little huts and stuff all at the field. Well, yeah, there is a house on the front. Mm.
Those little buildings are, I think, the cattery and agricultural
little shed thing.
Type sheds and
but I can't see a problem, and I don't see why you can't say that it's not infill. I mean, on page 45, paragraph 21, it outlines the green belt serves 5 purposes: to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas. Well, it's not that. To prevent neighbouring towns merging. It's not that. To assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. It's not encroaching further. And to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns. It's not that either. So, I mean, quite frankly, I can't see a problem with it.
Okay, thank you. Do you want? You're agitating to.
Chairman, I would just I wouldn't disagree with some of the points that Councillor Thurman made. I would disagree that this, in my view, is encroachment into the countryside. So, on that basis, it does conflict with C under paragraph 134.
Thank you. And Councillor Mallender, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I quite agree with Councillor Thurman and Councillor Smith in that if it was after number 99, which is a house, as is number 95 and 97, and the thing that's called roofs, they are all houses. There might be little huts as well, but there's not just little huts. There are substantial houses right along that road. And then next to that, I'm looking on an aerial photograph here. I don't know what it is, actually, but I've tried to look it up to see businesses. I presume it's meant to be a farm, but my goodness, it doesn't look like a farm. There's something absolutely vast there. Are they greenhouses? And there appears to be some sort of sewage treatment plant. I'm talking about further along Moor Lane.
To the east?
Yes.
So
keep on going on your aerial. Get Google Maps up and have a look. There's what appears to be a sewage treatment plant. Well, you can't see it on that because it's too high, and there's just it's huge. But anyway, I realise it may be considered to be agriculture, which is a sad reflection on what agriculture is like these days. But yes, I fully agree that this is infill because there are 4 more houses along the road, ordinary residential dwellings, so that are therefore that if it was past that, then that would be encroaching onto the countryside. But this isn't.
Mr. Pegram.
Chairman, yes, I've got the image up. Thank you very much, Councillor Mallender. As far as I can see from that, we're talking about, I can't see the name of it now and there, but yes, there are a number of glass houses, barns, Howick, A.G. Howick, I don't know if that's the name of the owner or the farm, Chairman, but basically, those are agricultural activities which paragraph 145 accepts in the Greenbelt as appropriate development. Or not inappropriate development. The issue, Chairman, just to reiterate, there's two threads to this really. Is it infill development? That is a matter of judgment to a certain extent, having regard to the character and the pattern of development in the area, because there is no definition of infill in the MPPF or any policy documents. The closest we get is a suggestion that an infill plot is a small gap in an otherwise built-up frontage or between existing buildings. The other factor is, Chairman, even if it were infill, is it in the village? And your officer's contention is, even if it were infill, it's not in the village because it's beyond the extent of the main built-up area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Any other speakers on this, or are we moving on towards? I think that anyone want to add anything on this? No, Councillor Smith.
Back, because this is an existing garden, isn't it? It's number 63. And I don't see why that's a problem, because isn't that deemed to be sort of brown field then? Not?
Sorry, Chairman. The definition in the NPPF, there is a definition of previously developed land, and that specifically precludes or excludes garden areas to existing residential properties.
A very swift answer there, Councillor
Yeah, sorry, I'm
Smith.
just thinking back. In my village of Cropple Butler, an eminent doctor was a very keen gardener, and he acquired some extra garden, and it was in the national papers. He had to restore it to grassland.
Right.
Sorry.
No, that's all right.
Having walked all round Goatham delivering leaflets in the recent by-election, it is very much in the village, in my opinion.
I get the distinct impression you feel very strongly about that view, and that's absolutely fine. Right, I think I suspect we've discussed this probably as much as we can. We've got a recommendation in the papers and the report to refuse on for the reasons shown on page 49 and 50. We haven't had an alternative recommendation made, so I think we'll go to a vote on the recommendation as per the report, which is to refuse permission for the reasons given. Can we have a show of hands in favour of that recommendation, please? Six. And those against that recommendation? Five. So that's 6-5 in favour of the recommendation of the application, so permission is refused. Okay, thank you. Right, we've been sitting here for nearly 2 hours now, and I suspect we want to have a little natural break. So it's just gone a 8:15. Shall we aim for 10 minutes, come back at 8:25? Is that all right, please? Thank you.
It's the one on the right. You press that one on the right, and then there's the stick. Yeah, that's all there.
Right, welcome back. We've blamed the chairman for being late coming back. There was a big queue at the coffee machine and it was slow to catch up. That's my excuse. Right, we'll go on to the next application now, please, which is 62 Repton Road, West Bridgford. This is an application. We're discussing the single-storey rear extension, and this is a retrospective change to previous planning permission as referred in the report. We are, as I say, that's the issue under discussion tonight. Mr. Pegram, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The application site, Chairman, is a detached property on Repton Road, clearly within the built-up part of West Bridgford. There is a history to this property. There's been previous applications which included an application for a two-storey side and single-storey rear extension, and I'll explain how we arrive at where we are now in just a moment, Chairman. That's the aerial photograph showing the building before extensions, obviously. And this is the property within the street scene. As you say, this is a rear extension, so these are really only shown for benefit of context because the extension doesn't have an impact on the street scene or the front elevation. That you can see, Chairman, the two-storey extension that was built pursuant to the previous planning permission. Moving to the rear, this is the extension which is under consideration this evening, Chairman. Just to provide you with a bit of history to this property and how we get to where we are now, there was an application for a two-storey side, single-storey front, two-storey side and single-storey rear extension. The work was commenced on site. There are a number of issues raised with the development, including in respect of the two-storey element, but clearly we are not considering that this evening. We're only looking at the single-storey element. The original permission for the single-storey element was a single-storey extension with a hipped, pitched roof. During construction, it became brought to our attention that it was being built not in accordance with the approved plans, Chairman. It's been built with a flat roof and a parapet wall. A second application was submitted to seek a variation to the previous permission to build it with a flat roof and a parapet wall. That was approved. Subsequently to that, Chairman, it then became apparent to us that, as built, it didn't comply with the planning permission that was granted. In particular, it was shown on the plans to be 3.2 metres in height from DPC to top of parapet, and 3.6 metres in height from ground level to top of parapet. Measured on site, the extension is between 3.9 and 3.93 metres in height, clearly higher than was as approved. This application was submitted to seek to regularise that situation. However, Chairman, through the course of this application, we've negotiated with the applicant's agent to try and arrive at something that was closer to what was originally approved. So the proposal that's before you tonight is not to approve what you see in the photographs, but to approve effectively that extension with the removal of 3 courses of brickwork from the parapet wall, which would bring the extension down to 3.675 metres at its highest point, therefore 75 millimetres higher than the previously approved single-storey extension. That's the background and the history to the property, Chairman. Just to go through the photographs, this is looking down the garden to number 62 Repton Road at the extension. This is looking at the corner of the extension, so that is on the, get my bearings, Chairman, bear with me. That's on the northern side of the extension corner, showing that relationship with the neighbouring property to the north. That's looking down the side of the property, so the neighbouring property has a conservatory in this position. This is the extension on the right. That's looking again down the side, but from the opposite direction, down into the garden of number 62. Then looking across the other direction, more southerly direction, you can see the other property just creeping into the picture here to the south. That's looking closer to it with the relationship. And this one is taken looking out of the window of the application property. And you can see that there is scope to reduce the height of that parapet, clearly. This is now stood within the neighbouring property. Looking at the extension, you can see this is the point at which I think it's 3.93 metres at that corner from ground level. As I say, proposal is to reduce that by taking 3 courses of brickwork off the extension. And that's again another picture looking at the relationship with the neighbouring property. This shows you, Chairman, the footprint. You can see that previously there was a single-storey extension and conservatory on the rear. The two-storey extension is down the side. As I say, that's not the subject of this application. So what you're being asked to consider is the hatched area, which is the new single-storey extension, but with the reduction in height as I've described. So this shows you again the elevations as built and the 6.93, I should, no, 3.93, Chairman, 3.93 metres in that corner. And the proposal is to take the 3 courses of brickwork off, so you can see there's a difference in the height between the hopper and the top of the parapet, bringing that extension down at that point to 3.675 metres. Closer to, Chairman, the approved scheme. In your officer's opinion, Chairman, there is a fallback position here to construct the extension as originally granted, and that would still result in an extension which is only 75 millimetres lower than what you're being asked to consider this evening. Based on that, Chairman, we are recommending that the application should be granted planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. And we have speakers on this item. We have 3 speakers. We have, first of all, Mrs. Kaur, who is the applicant. If you would like to speak to us, please. I'm sure everyone's learned from what happened earlier on, up to 5 minutes, and as soon as the clock starts, as soon as you start talking.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to provide some representation, so I thank the committee. I understand that I can only discuss the facts related to the single-storey extension, so I'd like to start by saying that having had constructive discussions with the planning officers, we would be really agreeable to reduce the parapet height by 3 bricks. I want really the opportunity to explain the purpose of the parapet. The flat roof actually has got rubber roofing, and the rubber roofing goes up into the parapet. It's a bit like a pond liner is the best way I can describe it. And the reason why it goes like that, as I understand it, is to do with the 20-year guarantee. Clearly, we would lose that guarantee by reducing the brick loads. So my representations to the planning committee would be to look upon this as remedial rather than looking at the planning system in a punitive way. I don't know whether it's permissible for me to put an alternative to you, but I'll be guided by you, Chair.
Basically, no.
Okay, that's fine.
All we can discuss and debate tonight is the application as per application. We can't start getting into debate and discussion about alternatives.
So, as I understand it, it's roughly that much higher, and by reducing it by 3 bricks, it would be that much higher than what the planning permission should be. I'm sorry, I'm a really concrete person. I have to hold things in my hand. What I would like to make representations about is that the gardens on Repton Road on this side are south west facing, so they get the whole of the sunlight, they get lots of light, and therefore the shadowing that objectors have proposed is actually very minimal. I've actually stood in the conservatory of number 60, and there was plenty of light coming in. What I would ask the committee to take into account is that there is a large green hedge growing between the properties, and a part of that green hedge actually is close up to the conservatory window for number 60. I would also like the committee to take into account that the houses on Repton Road go up a gradient, so each house is slightly higher than the house next to it, and that does make a difference in terms of how much we can actually see or not see over each other's houses. I'd also like the committee to understand that the reason why the height is as it is that internally the ceilings and the floor are level with the rest of the old house, and in particular the flooring needed to be level with the rest of the house, particularly as I have my elderly mother living with me. She's got dementia, she's got mobility problems. It's important that she doesn't have any trips or falls there. It's never been our intention to deceive. I think what the architect did was originally count the bricks and then make a wrong calculation. I understand bricks are measured in metrics or imperial, and he just made the wrong conversion. So thank you very much for listening. I just want to emphasise that we would go along with the recommendations made by the planning officers should the committee support those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Cole, and that's just within 5 minutes as well, so thank you very much. Super, yes, thank you. We have another speaker on this now. This is Mrs. Randell, who is a neighbour and is speaking an objection. Or is it Mr. Randell? That's fine, yes. I think they're on the way round. They're on the present.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you just tell me if?
We just need to wait a moment just to have a look at the what you're handing round. Okay, we've all seen, it's important we'll see what you're showing us. So, which we've got, and so you have up to 5 minutes if you press the right-hand button.
Can do, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so this is a view of the wall as, during construction. Can you go to the next one? This is a view from number 60 of, there's their conservatory. It is completely overshadowed, as you can see. There's no chance, there's the sun shining from behind there. You know, the light is severely restricted. Next one. This is as on the printout. That's the view of the wall from our side. Next. This is a view of the flat roof. You can see ponding of water on the top. Next. This is under construction. Can you see that the top of it's quite dim, but the top of the wall is way above. That's it, up there. Yeah, that's right. Next. Another view from our garden. Next. That's a view down our side where it shows the eaves, the new eaves, severely cutting our light. Next. Same again. Next. Okay, that's the lot, I think. Okay, so so my notes here. I'd like to put before the committee an interpretation of Mr. Pegram's report and also comments on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Marshall on the other side at number 60. The whole procedure has been a series of increasingly desperate attempts to make the planning permission fit the building already present, with no consideration to adjacent neighbours' distress and amenity. We strongly disagree with the planner's recommendation to approve the planning permission. Procedural actions by the planners have left neighbours despondent and have lost faith in the system. The retrospective application proposes to reduce the height of the extension as built, but the recommended planning conditions don't state a timescale for the work to be carried out if approved today. 3.675 height is a 22.5 height increase above permitted development height, which is a 3 metre height within a 2 metre distance of a boundary. It's wrong to dismiss this as marginal, as in paragraph 3. As built, 3.93 is 31% higher than anything that could be erected applying permitted development criteria. I would like to ask the members to consider the adverse impact to neighbours with this percentage increase. Plus, it is built on a raised patio. It's not in keeping with the topography of the garden scene and is an unneighbourly development, and planning should seriously take this into account. It's the highest single-storey extension on the road so far. Section 16 of the Planning and Compensation Act 1991 states that local planning authorities must not entertain applications where statutory requirement to 1. Notify owners of planning applications, or 2. To certify that they've done so, have not been met. This means that there should have been a Certificate B issued, and the issue of an incorrect Certificate A has been brought to the attention of officers referenced in paragraph 14, but has not been remedied on all applications. Also, paragraph 24, if encroachments are not regularised to as built, it becomes lawful after a period of 4 years by default. This leaves intrusive eaves overhangs and is biased behaviour by the planning to allow this to happen by leaving it unauthorised. If no enforcement action takes place within 4 years, all breaches, etc. can be overcome with a lawful development certificate, and 1 year has now already elapsed. So the first set of plans, the approved plans for the original lower pitched roof plan, this was obviously breached. Plan number 2 was a resubmission. These were building control plans dated March 2017, with building started May 2017, which shows that the approved single storey was never going to be a dual pitch roof because building was started using plan number 2. Heights of walls on these plans in the delegated report are 3.2 and 3.2 sloping to 3.6 maximum, and are measured at finished floor level, not ground level. At no point did it show the as-built 3.93 height at its highest point for both adjacent properties. After objections by a councillor, plans number 3 were submitted. This approach the planning took here denied the neighbouring occupiers the opportunity to have representations heard by members at a committee, because we no longer had a chance to complain about plan number 2. Plan number 3 was submitted when officers decided the heights were not as approved plans. This build is not compliant with MPPF, and all other criteria are not in the public interest. Paragraph 13, all these objections are important and many are material considerations. This doesn't fit in with the street scene or garden scene for Repton Road and is setting a precedent. Paragraph 33 states that there aren't any design grounds to object, but this single storey does affect the scale of the building, and so if refused it should be on the grounds and not adhering to proposed plans, and on amenity grounds and precedent, not design. So to close, from the original breached plans, it has had a resubmission, a regularisation, and then a split plan consisting of retrospective and a raised patio, and on an already raised patio height. How many more plans and procedures are needed to try and make it fit? So what we really want is to return to the original pitched roof plans, but basically to get the height reduced as low as possible.
Sorry, I was just rapidly writing notes down there. You've made a lot of comments about various planning law paragraphs, technicalities, and so on. I think we just need to clarify something.
Yes, John, if I may, I just wanted to check with Mr. Rendell what the he referred to a section or piece of legislation. I want to make sure I've got the right one.
So we couldn't quite hear.
Can you repeat what you said at the beginning of your public speaking? Though you said that there was a requirement under to serve notice on the neighbour and certification that you had done. I think I know what you mean, but I just want to clarify the point. Yes, yeah. If that's what you mean, that's fine. That's all I needed. That's fine. Okay.
Thank you. We just wanted to make sure we'd heard everything properly. Right. So those we have another speaker on this, who is Councillor Jones, who is the ward member for the area. So Councillor Jones, please. And when you're ready.
I was contacted by both neighbours but presented my own views. The changes at this property did not reflect well on the builder and the agent. There are problems outside of planning, begging questions about building control. The single-storey extension is built over a shared foul water drain. The builder dug up the neighbour's path and joined 2 toilet outfalls from the extension into the neighbour's drain. the builder damaged the pavement such that the county is seeking recompense. But the planning approval is not reflected in what was built in a number of ways. Windows to both side elevations are supposed to be obscure glazed, but I'm told that some are glazed with film stuck on, and some windows supposed to open inwards open outwards. The two-storey extension, as approved, as you can see, was supposed to have a box gutter. Building 2 stories in place of a garage right up to the boundary is out of keeping with the character of the road, but at least the roof was supposed to not overhang the neighbour's side passage, darkening it, as you can see. Yet paragraph 24 of the report tells you that these unauthorised changes will remain and it is not expedient to take enforcement action. I would ask the committee to question this and what it says about the council's position to the public. In this narrow planning world, you are told you can only consider the application for changes again to the rear extension. Please note the change in heights to the side of the extension. As has been said, in 2017, the application that was approved was for a hip roof and it was 2.5 metres to the eaves. Nobody objected. Another application, which was approved in January 2018, subject to building in accordance with the plans and obscure glazing and inward opening windows on some windows. Importantly, the single-storey extension would now be a flat roof behind a coped parapet to a maximum of 3.6 metres, reducing to 3.2 metres to the side, to both sides, taking account of the relative higher ground. The officer's report acknowledged that this was higher than the previous extensions and slightly higher eaves than before, but did not consider this overbearing. So from 2.5, the sides were to go to 3.2. Please note that 3.2 metres to the side is not mentioned in the report in front of you. I regret to say that the report in front of you sidesteps this key information. I think this is awful and misleading to the committee. Contrary to approval, what has been built, and I can circulate a copy of the officer's report for approval, which shows that. Contrary to approval, what has been built is a steady 3.93 metres overall, as the report describes, and it now recommends it going down to 3.675 with no timescale. It presents this as just one brick higher than the 3.6 approved, but this is not true. It's a lot more than the 3.2 metres height to the side, which the extant approval was for. The reason why planners are not insisting on what is approved is given in paragraph 27. The agent says the drains, the water needs to be drained. Well, there are drains in the back, as you can see. In any event, that's the agent's problem and not an acceptable reason for neighbouring properties to suffer the effect of this blockhouse. This proposal at the sides is almost half a metre, 45 centimetres, higher than that approved and a full 1.4 metres higher than the first approval. Planning should not capitulate to creeping heights. The resulting height and proposed height means that the design is ugly without relief. The visual impact for neighbouring properties is one of a dominant unbroken block of bricks topped by concrete paving slabs. It is not in keeping with the area. Its scale and mass are overbearing and over-dominant on the neighbouring properties. I suggest to the committee that the reason this proposal should be refused is that it is contrary to the policy tests within paragraph 127 and 130 of the MPPF, nor in line with policy 10 of the core strategy and policy GP2 of the non-statutory replacement local plan, which all seek to ensure a good standard of design which protect the amenity of existing occupiers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones, just in time as well. Right, so those are our speakers on this. We heard from Mrs. Kaur, who is the applicant, who is explaining what has been happening with the house and the extension, explained the flat roof situation and puddling, and regards it as being more of a remedial works that's taking place. Also pointed out her opinion about the sunlight comments. We heard from Mr. Rendell and Mrs. Rendell, who gave some photographs. and was talking about the impact that the extension is having on their property. And Councillor Jones pointed out that he was, as well as representing the comments of neighbours, was making his own views known. There were also quite a lot of comments there, not particularly planning as such, although they are planning, but they're also building regulation comments and so on, which are not necessarily we can't really go into big detail about the technical issues, but I understand what he's saying. Also, it feels very strongly that it's not in keeping with the neighbouring properties and is overbearing, and also contradicts various national planning policy frameworks and borough policies. So quite a lot there. I think I've covered most points, but you've made some points as well, Mr. Pegram. Do you want to pick up on those, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just so that if I can refer members to the agenda plan that's in there rather than change the screen at the moment, just to clarify the orientation of this property, you can see that Repton Road runs north-south. The front of the properties on Repton Road is east. The gardens are to the west. So just to clarify, yes, I think there would be some impact in terms of overshadowing on number 60, because clearly it's north. Not so much in the morning, because the original house would have cast some shadow. Certainly, middle of the day, there may be a degree of overshadowing, but certainly lessened in the summer months when the sun is higher in the sky. And then as the sun moves around, clearly that would be to the west, so the extension shouldn't have any impact on the western sunshine. I know Mrs. Core made the point that the gardens are to the south-west of the extension, and I just wanted to clarify that point for members so that they understood the orientation. Chairman, if members are minded to recommend to approve the application, I would recommend an additional condition that does specify the time period within which the height of the extension has got to be reduced. We would have to consider what a reasonable timescale is, obviously. The point that Mr. Rendell was making, he's referring, I think, to Article 13 in the Development Management Procedure Order, which requires applicants to either certify that no person other than themselves was an owner of any part of the property to which the application relates, or if their application relates to parts that they don't own or control, they have to serve notice on those properties and complete a certificate to us to confirm they've done that. Just to reiterate, I think that largely relates to this picture you can see, where there is an overhang of the eave. So arguably that is a trespass of airspace, that is encroaching onto the neighbouring property. However, Chairman, I would reiterate that we are looking at the single-story extension at the rear, not this one here. There were also other comments about these windows opening outwards. We sought to remedy that through the second application. I was advised by one of my enforcement officers that that work has been carried out and those windows now open inwards. The issue about this, Chairman, yes, it is not strictly in accordance with the approved plans. However, this committee this evening is not here to determine whether we take enforcement action or not. That is a matter largely for officers. Enforcement is a discretionary power. We obviously don't condone where works are done not in accordance with plans, but we are where we are. Enforcement is a discretionary power, and your officers have reached the view that in planning terms, in planning harm terms, there is no planning harm and therefore no grounds on which to take enforcement action. Clearly there remains a civil matter, as you referred to. There are also other matters of civil nature in terms of trespass onto the neighbour and in terms of work that was carried out on their property. Chairman, Councillor Jones made reference to the window that's in the side of the side of the extension, which has been obscure glazed by the provision of film. That is quite correct. I picked that up, and you'll see that there is a condition in the report which requires within a specified time period that window is rendered, or certainly that lower pane of the window is rendered permanently obscured to group level 5 of privacy, which is the highest level of obscure glazing you can get. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pegram. So a lot to take in there. Ready to open up for a discussion, please? So who'd like to start on with this, please? And remember, we are talking, although we've heard a lot of history and a lot of issues with regards to this application, we are can only discuss the actual application, the changes, modifications to the single story rear extension. Councillor Holt.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 27 is where the agent talks about the fact that he can't take, that the roof isn't flat, it slightly falls. I've had some expert advice on this, and I'm torn between the builder who actually has built this, presumably had a set of plans in front of him and was required to build it to a certain height. And therefore, he has built it according to the permissions granted. So I'm at a loss to understand how it got to this height in the first place. However, his excuse, the agent's excuse about the fact that they can't take 3 courses of bricks down because the flat roof is slightly sloping, is erroneous. Any builder will tell you that that can be achieved if there is the will to do so. But that's not our brief. We're not supposed to be no, that's nothing to do with us. It's not to do with planning commissions. But I would just like to point that out, that that is being used as an excuse, and any builder worth his weight would not say that. Thank you.
Mr. Peckham.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I would like to again reiterate and acknowledge that we do not condone where work is carried out not in accordance with approved plans. And clearly it does happen from time to time, and I think the comment was made by either Mr. Rendell or Councillor Jones that it doesn't reflect well on the builder or the architect. No, it doesn't. And I have written to the architect in quite strong terms about this, Chairman. The issue about the reduction in the height of the parapet wall is that we've sought to reduce the height by as much as we can. Now, how it's been, and I've sought clarification on this personally, Chairman, there's a gradual slope. You saw in the back of the extension there are hoppers. So obviously the water is designed to run away from the main house to the back of the extension to these hoppers. What I am told, Chairman, is that if you were to remove more than 3 bricks from this extension, the height of the roof deck at this point would effectively be above the level of the wall. That's how it's been explained to me. So, yes, you can remove the 3 bricks that we have sought to get removed, and we would seek through condition if approved. But if you took any more, that would take the wall below the level of the deck. Is that, yeah?
Does that clarifies, doesn't it? Right. Right. Who else is coming in? And is Councillor Edwards, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a bit of a sorry tale, and we're being brought in at the end of it to try to put a bit of sticking plaster on it. We've got, in fact, a very limited recommendation, haven't we, which is to reduce, it is about the glazing in the windows being remedied, and to approve the reduction of down to taking 3 courses of bricks off, so that what ends up is only 75 millimetres higher than what has already been approved. Have I understood that correctly? Are we all on the same page? Yeah, thank you. It's very difficult to say you don't approve that. So to really draw, hopefully, a line under this saga, I'd like to move the recommendation in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Yes, it is a complicated situation, and again, you're quite right. Although there are a lot of aspects to this whole situation, we are, as you quite rightly say, we can only discuss and talk about and decide on the recommendation that's in front of us. So you formally moved that recommendation as per with the additional condition about the timescale for completion.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yes. So we need to agree that. Do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Thurman? Yes, I saw your hand go up first. Does anyone else want to comment or want to ask any questions? Maybe one. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mallender.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this is absolutely what could be described as a dog's breakfast. It's just, I can't really I can't make a decision because I'm so constrained as to what I can make a decision on. So what I really want to make a decision on, I'm not allowed to. So what was the original plan for this particular part of the building, and how is it changed? And have we got some pictures to illustrate that? Because I really can't. I mean, I'm seeing, two different points of view from the applicant and the objector and the ward councillor, and there seems to be a very different point of view, obviously, but what was it originally supposed to look like? And then perhaps we can make a decision. Thank you.
I think we can look up the previous the permissions. It might just take a few moments
to. May go wrong, Chairman.
Oh.
Hopefully not.
It's,
How can you do Google Maps but you can't do the planning system?
so to swap around computers.
Sorry, Chairman. I'm happy to show these to clarify the point that Councillor Mallender has raised, but I would stress that we are considering what is before you tonight. Not what was considered previously.
That's Councillor.
I was just going to say, Mr. Chairman, that the issue at hand is that the difference between what is proposed and what has actual planning permission has been either suggested to be 3 inches or quite a bit more than 3 inches, 3.2 metres to 3.675, and so I dialed up on my internet the plans of the last application, and I can see that there are in fact 2 measurements at the side. One is the previous plan says 3.6 metres to finished soil level, and then there is another measurement next to that saying 3.2 metres. And so that seems to be the finished soil level in the agreed plan is shown to be 3.6 metres to the top of the parapet. And so the change is from 3.6 metres to 3.67 metres, 5 metres, which is 3 inches. But there is another measurement on the plan that says 3.2 metres, and you found a different plan to what I've got up. But that was just my Philip speech. Thank you very much.
Chairman, this may go. Can I? If I do this first, Councillor Marks, it might answer your question, and I'm happy to answer any question afterwards. Mr. Rendell circulated a picture with various dimensions marked on it, including one that was 2.5 metres. So the original application that we dealt with, Chairman, on this site was for a single-storey extension at the rear with a double-pitched roof and a gable end at the back. Indication on that plan is that the height to the eaves would be 2.5 metres from finished floor level. That's the original approval that we gave permission for, but then subsequently found was being built not in accordance with the approved plan. Excuse me 1 second, Chair. I just need to scoot off to the other one. 766. Right.
Yes.
Phase 2 of this story, Chairman, is this application, which, if I pick the wrong, I'll probably pick the wrong one. No. So this is when we discovered or were advised by the neighbours that it was not being built in accordance with the approved plans, we sought this application seeking to regularise the situation. Now, this is not the plan that Councillor Stockwood was looking at, I don't think. It's another one on the same application. Bear with me, Chairman. Come on. No, excuse me, Chairman. Sorry to apologise.
Very clear. good architectural drawing that
You're
was,
now
wasn't it?
seeing the back office system, Chairman. I will use that one because I think it's... So basically, oh no, wrong one. I do apologise, Chairman. Blame the operator. So, Chairman, as Councillor Stockwell was looking at a plan as well on this, effectively you can see that that elevation shows a distance of 3.6 metres down to, it is a little bit confusing, I accept, but there's a line there which is representative of ground level. So it was proposed to be 3.6 metres from ground level, and on this side it showed 3.2 metres, and that's representative of DPC or finished floor level. So that's what we approved on the second application. What was built, whether the builder had a plan on site, I cannot confirm otherwise. What was built was an extension that measured 3.93 metres to that point, not the 3.6 it should have done. Thank you, Chairman.
So can I come back?
Yes,
so,
Councillor Malader.
so what about the assertion that's been made that it's been built on top of a raised patio? So how has that affected the height?
Chairman, I think the issue here is that my understanding is that there is a difference in level between front of property at street level and the rear of the properties. That's the neighbouring property. So again, you can see that the garden here is quite a lot lower than finished floor level of the house, and they've got a raised decking there. So I think probably there may have been on the back of this property before, there may have been a raised patio. However, that's taken away. They built the extension, and that is what you're being asked to consider with the reduction in height of the parapet.
Thank you.
Does that help to clarify those points, Chairman?
Is that helpful? Good. It is complex. Councillor Stockwood, you wanted to come in on this?
No, sorry for my interjection.
Right.
It made it more complicated, but I think it's validly moved.
This is one of those cases, and it's very, very hard to get your head around. But at the end of the day, we are still looking at what the permission is on the report. There is so much to this, and the background to this, which we're very aware of. As a clarification, if we were not to give to approve tonight, so if we refused it for whatever reasons given, there is reference in the report to the fallback. Could you just clarify what that would actually mean? So if permission is not given tonight, what actually happens? Is that when that comes into play?
To an extent, Chairman, if members were minded to refuse this application this evening, you would leave officers with the situation that we would then have to determine whether it was expedient to take enforcement action against what is built, or if they were to continue and alter it as is proposed, what the resultant height would be. Enforcement, the legislation is quite clear. Dealing with planning applications is a statutory function. Taking enforcement action is a discretionary power. So we don't have to take enforcement action against something which is not authorised or is not in accordance with approved plans. Repeat, we do not condone it. It frustrates officers. I can tell you that. We don't like the fact that we approve things and then builders build things either not in accordance. Sometimes it is pure ignorance. It might be that they've had to change something because of building regulations requirements, and they've changed it. Some do it. I hope some don't do it just to stick two fingers up at the borough council. But it does happen, and it frustrates officers. But ultimately, if members were minded to refuse this application this evening, we would have to determine whether it was expedient to take action. if they were to remove the 3 courses of brickwork that we have negotiated through this application, it would leave you with an extension that would be 75 millimetres higher than was previously approved. Chairman, in my opinion, in that situation, and it's not a decision for this committee, in that situation, we might, and I'm saying might because that would be a decision we would have to take at that stage, we might resolve that it would not be expedient to take action because the fallback position is an extension which is only 75 millimetres lower than you're being asked to consider this evening. It would remain unauthorised, i.e., wouldn't have planning permission because it would be, you would have refused permission. Alternatively, the alternative approach, I will give the alternative because clearly we have to look at all options. We might decide that we would take enforcement action against it, and they might then have to demolish the extension that's been built. But those are the options, and those are the sorts of considerations that we would have to go through with the advice of our legal advisors, because they will be very keen that during that process, as part of the process, we have to identify what the planning harm is. And that is something we have to identify in any enforcement notice. So the options are, if you refuse permission, we could determine that it wasn't expedient to take action, or we could determine that yes, it was expedient to take action. That might be serve an enforcement notice requiring the demolition of the extension as the sort of extremes that we would be looking at. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. I hope that's helpful. Right. I think we have discussed as much as we can on this. We've had the recommendation as per the report moved by Councillor Edwards. Do you have a seconder? Or Councillor Hull, are you speaking? I'm sorry, I didn't write you down. I'm sorry. It's a long evening. Right. Sorry, I beg your pardon. But Councillor Hull, you want to speak, don't you? Sorry.
Well, for clarification, if we vote to go with the officer's recommendation of granting this particular planning application, it's a planning application for an extension that's already built, but you are going to add in a condition to it's not included in here at the moment, but you are going to add a condition which says that 3 courses of bricks has got to be removed with any subsequent remedy needed to within a specified time period, and the remedy of the flat roof and the permeable roof will be taken at that point. Is that correct? Thank you.
Is that helpful? Right. Councillor Smith.
What will the time period be? What would be?
Chairman, I was hovering somewhere between 3 and 6 months. Again, conditions have to satisfy tests. They have to be reasonable. Clearly, the applicant would have to secure a builder to carry out that work. Again, we shouldn't use the process punitively, but I would have said 6 months is probably a reasonable timescale to have that work done. Bearing in mind we are coming into the months when it's probably more beneficial to do it.
Okay, you're happy with that? It's that 6 month time, right? Any more speakers, or shall we go to the vote on this? So we've got the recommendation before us, along with the timescale and the deadline for completion. Better have a show of hands, please. In favour of that recommendation, please show. And anyone against? 1. So the recommendation is carried. This has been a very complicated case, very frustrating as well. And we are, as a committee, we are tied. And I know there will be frustrations on both sides here, but we are tied as to what we can decide on. And as you will have heard tonight, we've given it a lot of consideration. But if there's any architects, developers, or anyone out there who thinks that we are an easy pushover or whatever, we're not. And as you can see, a lot of times, a lot of angst on this from neighbours and all involved, and the committee as well. And not to mention the work done by the officers too. But we are where we are. We've made a decision, and we will see how it all progresses. Thank you. Right, we've still got applications to go, and ladies and gentlemen, we'll move on to the next application, which is 119 Gertrude Road, West Bridgford. It's a 2-storey side extension, A single story front and rear extensions, raised patio area, and rendering of extension existing property. And Mr. Pegram again, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Application relates to a property on Gertrude Road, number 119. It's located on the eastern side of Gertrude Road, as shown on here. That's the aerial photograph, giving you a flavour of the pattern of development in the area. And this is a picture of the front of the property that you're being asked to consider. You will see that part of the proposal does include the rendering of this property. You will see that there has been potentially, I guess, some movement and some repairs made. Rendering was helped to tidy that aspect up. There's a carport down the side, beyond which there is a garage, which you will see in subsequent photographs. That's looking at the neighbouring property to the north, number 117. You will see that there is a window or windows in that elevation. I am told by the case officer that these are a landing window and a toilet or bathroom window in that position. This is looking through the lean-to carport of the application property to the garage at the rear. And then into the rear garden, you can see, again, we have a situation where there is a drop in land levels between the road frontage and the rear gardens of these properties. This is the garage on the right in the photograph that you saw the front of through the carport. That's the garage in question. The proposed single-storey extension, well, I've got this up to give you some measure of distance. The proposed single-storey extension comes out and stops just short of the length, probably by 1 or 2 metres of the end of this garage. So there is already a presence of buildings along the boundary. That's looking at the other property, 117. The other way, no, sorry, bear with me, Chair. 121, do apologise, 121. You can see they have an extension on the rear. Similarly, they have windows in the side elevation and a mixture of walling and fencing along the boundary. This is now stood in the neighbour's property, I think, looking at, yes, this is stood in the neighbour's property at 117, looking up at the garage. Oh, wrong picture, Chairman. I'll come back to that one if I may. I think they've come out of order. Where's it gone? Yes, that is stood in the neighbour's garden at the lower level, looking up at that garage. As I said, part of this proposal does involve the rendering of the property, and I think concern has been expressed that rendering would be an alien material in the area. This is on the same street, so there is a rendered property in the street. Similarly, there's other properties which contain render as part of their material palette. There are also in the wider area of Lady Bay a mix of properties with render. Again, Chairman, this is the existing property as you saw it in the photographs. And the proposal, if I zoom in a little bit because the images are quite small, so the proposal involves a single-storey extension across the front to just slightly enlarge the lounge and provide a porch there, a 2-storey extension on the side, and then at the rear a single-storey extension. Just to clarify, bear in mind what we've just been discussing on the other side, this is representative of DPC level, not the lower ground level of the garden at the rear. The proposal does also include an extension of the raised patio to beyond the end of this extension. So again, looking at the layout, Chairman, ground floor, small extension to the front. What's called a garage, although it's only 2.5 wide by, 2 metres wide by 3.5 metres long, so obviously it couldn't accommodate a car. Behind that there would be a utility room and then a kitchen family room at the rear in the single-storey element, and then on the other side, at first floor level, a bedroom with an ensuite, two bedrooms, one at the front and one at the rear. Come out again, Andrew. So Chairman, we have looked carefully at the impact of this extension in the wider area and on neighbouring properties. We're satisfied in terms of the wider area in the street, seeing it as a sympathetic addition that does not detract from the character of the area or the amenities of the area. And in terms of the impact on the neighbours, Chairman, it is quite a deep extension at the back. The single-storey element is 6 metres long. However, in terms of the impact, particularly on this neighbour, we believe that is mitigated, or not necessarily mitigated to a certain extent, but there is, as you saw, existing structures along the boundary arguably, one may argue that this might be an improvement to the appearance of what's already on the boundary. On that basis, Chairman, the application is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. And we have speakers on this application as well. We have 3 speakers. We have the applicant, an objector and the ward member. And so the first speaker is Mr. Morley, who is the applicant. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, it says Mr. Morley here, so yes. So you're definitely not Damien. It says Damien here. So, so Mrs. Morley, you're the applicant. So you've seen how it all works. Right-hand button, red light.
Thank you. So firstly, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for your time this evening and try and make it quick because I know everybody's ready to go home. I'd like to go through the objections one by one just to reaffirm the points that have been made in the appraisal. So objection A. Both windows on the side elevation of property 117 are obscurely glazed and neither of them are habitable rooms. Also, the proposed extension is set back by 1 metre in order to be sympathetic towards this and still allow enough light into the area. Point B, regarding massing and overbearing nature of the side extension. The proposed side extension has been designed sympathetically and set back far from, and well, from our opinion, is far from more overbearing. Just a short drive around the borough and you can clearly see a large number of projects with similar designs and 2-storey side extensions. As you've seen in the slides, the current state of the property externally is unsightly. Gertrude Road is an eclectic mix of different properties and designs. The garage that is currently there contains asbestos, which obviously environmentally would be beneficial to remove. For point D, we have quite clearly taken into account the terracing effect. By setting back the extension in accordance to the guidelines of the Borough Council, it's set back by 1 metre and we've also set down the roof of the extension from the main ridge line by 300 millimetres, therefore allowing a clear definition. I'd like to cover points E and K together. The current carport, as I've already said, is unsightly and it's broken. And as you can see on the slides, the bins are actually on the drive and they have been stored at the front of the property for almost 6 years while we've been living there. Without the bins there, we can actually fit 2 cars on the drive that is currently there, and that's inclusive of once the extension has been built. Had the plans been looked at properly prior to the objections being made, it's clear that the side extension will consist of a small garage, which will also in turn be home to the wheelie bins, which therefore takes them off the road and in turn allows us to park 2 vehicles on the drive. Had we not changed the front garden, so in the picture you can see that we've actually re-landscaped the drive, you could barely fit 1 car on the drive prior to us making those changes. Points F, G and H are all covered under the Party Wall Act. The properties will be surveyed under regulations and excavations will be completed in sections so as to prevent any damage to either of the neighbouring properties. Points I and J are both building control issues in conjunction with Severn Trent Water, and part of the process of the application will enter into a building over agreement with Severn Trent. Again, point L, the method of construction is quite clearly laid out in the plans and all works will adhere to current building regulations and be inspected as and when necessary. Access for emergency services, well, currently the carport is there and it's barely accessible. So the access would be the same as if the extension was built, it would be through the property. We've already made a large number of amendments to the property in relation to Part L of the building regulations by internally insulating all of the external walls of the property. Our intentions are solely to improve the current property and its external appearance. We're a young growing family who want to create a suitable family home which is aesthetically pleasing both inside and out. Having lived in the house for 6 years and seen countless extensions in the area, we feel that our plans and application is far from an issue. We feel after discussions with the planning authority, we've also agreed with them and are more than accommodating to all of the recommendations set out in the document. And yeah, I'd like to thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Morley. That was
Thank
very
you.
clear. Thank you, and well within time again. Our next speaker on this is, I'm assuming it's Mrs. Plant, who is, you are a neighbour, next door neighbour. Yeah.
117 Gertrude Road.
So that's the property to the left, as you
Yes,
look at it.
yes.
So you have up to 5 minutes, please. Thank you. Oh, you just press it again, and that's
Okay.
it.
Is it? To set this into context, I've lived for over 50 years in my house in Lady Bay, and I have seen a huge amount of changes and developments to my adjoining neighbours and in the locality over those years. I would like to make it absolutely clear that I have no objection to building improvements and see development as a necessary part of maintaining the community. I'm concerned with the extent of the proposed extension at 119 and how it will harmonise with other properties, and in particular how it will impinge on my property and affect my amenities both during construction and afterwards in terms of appearance and maintenance. The on-street view of the full width proposal at 190 will make the property look more like a terrace property, even with a small recess. This is in a row of mainly semi-detached and detached properties built in red bricks. The overall uninterrupted solid mass of building works facing my side elevation is oppressive and is quite frankly designed in a way that could be described as unneighbourly, overbearing and intrusive. In terms of the finer detail of the proposal, the distance between my property and 119 is only 1.1 metre. At the moment, the proposed sidewall will only be 100 millimetre from my boundary fence. How will any sort of building work, including foundation, etc., and any further maintenance going to be carried out without intruding onto my property? To clarify, the passageway between my side wall and the boundary is a basic lifeline for me and requires access at all times. I'm concerned about the potential for impeded access both during the construction work and for future maintenance work. Obstructed parking, whether intentionally or not, has already been an issue, and to reiterate that I require access at all times for deliveries of logs, to use my bikes and to take my bins in and out on a weekly basis through the passageway. I'm also concerned about the loss of light to my side elevation. There are three windows on my side wall. There's also a half-glazed external kitchen door providing much needed light for my narrow kitchen. There will also be a darkening effect to my passageway from the massing of the proposed extension. There is a combined drainage system between 119 and 117 in my passageway. I'm very concerned that during the construction work and in the future for maintenance, then this may be compromised. I need unimpeded access to toilet facilities at all times due to a specific medical condition. In addition, the proposed raised terrace will result in overlooking the only private amenity space available to me in my garden. Whilst I fully appreciate that some of the issues raised may be considered out of scope for planning consideration, I hope my concerns will be taken into account and will be considered as part of this planning process, and that you will support me in objecting to this planning application. I will expect fully compliance with all relevant legislation, and in particular with the Party Wall Act. Thank you for giving me this time to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very clear and well within 5 minutes. So thank you very much. And we have the ward councillor to speak as well, Councillor Mallender, who we did some musical chairs a while ago, moved from that side to that side, and now you're in the middle. So.
Good evening, councillors, again. Thank you for letting me speak on this proposal. Like the resident at 117 Gertrude Road, who has spoken this evening, Councillor Richard Mallender and I have no objections to an extension at number 119 as such. Indeed, we agree with both the report and the applicant that the proposal removes some very unattractive old buildings on the site. And I'm sure a compromise could easily be reached to remove any loss of amenity to neighbours. Although there is a small recess on the plans, the on-street view will result in a terraced effect on a street of mainly semi-detached and detached houses. It should also be noted that there is a considerable difference in the height of the land at the rear and front of the properties, so that what at first appears seems to be a little different to the already present buildings at 119 is in fact a considerably more solid mass of wall. And this could be seen as oppressive when viewed from 117's much lower garden. By the way, I cannot understand why there was a photograph, because the person at number 117 says no one has been round, so unless you were trespassing, I don't know how that photograph was taken. I believe photographs have been sent to councillors on the committee showing the view from the garden taken by the person at 117. This is further exacerbated by the nearness of the proposed building at only 10 centimetres rather than the present gap of slightly over 1 metre. There doesn't appear to be room in the proposed garage for a modern vehicle. And although there is space on the drive, it would perhaps be better to have a garage space, and there is a reduction of parking space on a road that already has parking difficulties, as the original dwellings, when built, occasionally had garages, but these are too small to accommodate vehicles of the usual size to be found now. And many families in the area own more than one vehicle, and this is certainly the case at number 119. Although the report dismisses the loss of light as the windows at number 17 are not living rooms, the effect of the proposed building on the kitchen light will be quite substantial, as the rear kitchen window gives insufficient light without the addition of the light from the semi-glazed door. Although Condition 4 attempts to alleviate the problem of lack of privacy and overlooking from the proposed raised patio, the privacy schemes will result in even more overshadowing and massing for the neighbours. Thank you for your attention. I hope that the officers will work with the applicant and we can have a better solution and hopefully get rid of the unsightly buildings on this site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mallender. Could you just turn the microphone off, please? Thank you. Right, those are our speakers for this item. We have Mrs. Morley, the applicant, who was explaining to the objections that are in the report and explaining how they're going to deal with those, or how they've dealt with them. Mrs. Plant is the next door neighbour on the left, who doesn't really necessarily object to improvements, but is worried about aspects impact on her property, such as the terracing effect and loss of light and being overbearing. And similarly, Councillor Mallender doesn't necessarily object to improvements or extensions, but is worried about some of the detail on this and compromising the neighbouring property in particular. So I think those are the main points. Could you pick up on those, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. Chairman, there was mention of a lot of issues which I think you yourself commented were not planning matters, about how the extension would be built, etc. I would draw members' attention to the informatives on page 70. Clearly, a lot of building work does take place, or we do get applications to build extensions close to the boundary. Those informatives cover that very issue, i.e., the grant of planning permission doesn't give any legal right to enter onto the neighbour's land to carry out that work. It has to be done with their permission. Equally, we've highlighted the requirements of the Party Wall Act, which from the address to the committee, the applicants are well aware of. Chairman, there was concern about overlooking from the raised patio. I think it's on this drawing. You can see there is a proposal to continue the patio on beyond the end of the extension. As I told you, I think the extension falls about 1 or 2 metres short of the end of the garage. Then there would be a patio. Condition 4 requires the erection of what we call privacy screens. to prevent unacceptable overlooking of neighbouring properties. Bear with me, Chairman, I'm trying to multitask.
Yes, that's
there is obviously the issues of drainage was mentioned. There obviously a requirement for to liaise with Severn Trent to undertake appropriate work if it involves building over sewers. Turning to Councillor Mallander's comments, Chairman, I will take the one that I'm most concerned about first, a suggestion that my officers have trespassed onto the neighbouring property. I have in front of me, Chairman, the photographs that the case officer uploaded to our back office file. My understanding is that the case officer went onto the neighbouring property with the knowledge and invitation of the neighbours to see the impact of this extension from their property. So I would refute any suggestion that there's been any trespass on the neighbouring property. Just in terms of some of the other issues, Chairman, concerned about the impact on the kitchen. Again, you can't unfortunately see this picture, well you can, but the kitchen has got a window at the rear. I think there is a probably best picture to look at is this one. My understanding from the neighbours' address to committee is there's a glazed door somewhere in the side of the property here. Chairman, I would suggest that that probably is already compromised by the structures and the existing dwelling, and given the presence of the window in the rear elevation, I'm satisfied that any sort of reason for refusal on loss of light to that accommodation would not be a justified or sustainable reason to refuse permission. The garage, Chairman, as I said, is only 2.5 metres wide. I'd struggle to see how you'd get a wider garage in that position. Or is it 2 metres? Let me just check. I did write it down earlier. 2 metres. So it's 2 metres wide internally. So clearly not big enough to accommodate a car. I would suggest even the existing carport presents challenges for modern cars, and therefore this does provide an option for a garden store, and I think the applicant told you they intend to put their wheelie bins in there, removing them from the front of the property, so that's the intention of that garage facility, not to accommodate a car. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you, Mr. Pegram. I think that does address those points. My first speaker is Councillor Mayles, please.
On the slides showing the street scene, there appears to be a lot of houses with extensions, and this one seems quite appropriate. There is one thing, the concrete garage, is it staying or being taken down? Removed. Well, thank you, because I didn't think that it was a very, well, it needed to come down. Yeah, not very attractive, thank you. And anyway, I don't see any problems at all. They have been explained to me by the officer, and with that I will move the recommendation.
Right, thank you, Councillor Mayles. As per the report, you're moving the recommendation as per the report we have. Do you have a seconder at this stage? Oh, Councillor Bushman, thank you. Right, let me just make a note of that. Councillor Hull, please.
Thank you, Chair. My concerns with this particular application is the effect that it's going to have on number 117. If you could go back to that photograph of the front of the houses, please. Thank you. Now you can see that they're obviously going to extend to the actual extent of that wooden fence that they've got on their property, and you can see from that as the lady from number 117 said, it is literally 10 centimetres to the boundary, and that boundary goes right along between the very high fence and the low fence. So you just can't imagine all that daylight between those two buildings being completely filled in, all but 1 metre on the 117 side. That is a huge extension. Yes, it's set back. I accept that it's been set back to try and alleviate the terracing effect. But that is a huge amount of light that's no longer going to be going into the kitchen at the bottom there of number 117. So those are my concerns. I really do think it will lead to loss of light and overshadowing and massing onto number 117.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hull. Any comments you want to make on that? I think just for noting, and comments are Understood completely. Right, any other councillors? Councillor Donoghue.
Thank you. Two things really. I think my main issue is with the side extension, and I wondered if you could explain to me how the drainage would work, the guttering, etc., onto the neighbouring property. If there was any overhang, etc., what facility was in there?
The design of this property, unlike the one you looked at earlier this evening, presents a gable end to the neighbouring property. So the eaves overhang is front and rear, so you don't actually end up with an overhang onto the neighbouring property.
I have issue with it being so close, the side extension to the boundary. But my other curious question is, what is the definition of a garage? Because if you can't fit a car in it, what makes it a garage? Or does it sound better?
Well, it seems to be the fact that even on brand new houses now, you have a garage, and they're not really, even those aren't wide enough for cars. So you rarely see cars kept in garages. But is there an official?
Chairman, no, I don't think there is, but there is a definition of, or Lord Denning referred to a definition of a tree, that if it looks like a tree, it is a tree. So perhaps if it looks like a garage, it is a garage.
Well, thank you. So they're my concerns, really. It's the boundary, the loss of light, and again, it is implying more of a terrace effect.
Yeah, motorbikes, yes, and bicycles. Bicycles. Councillor Edwards, please.
Thank you. In the built-up area of West Bridgford, and Councillor Donoghue and I both represent the same part of West Bridgford, the construction of extensions like this is very common. Inevitably, when you put a side extension on, there will be some impact on the next door neighbour. There will be some impact on 117. The question before us, I think, is that impact so great as to merit us refusing this application? I then looked at the other things in this application, of which there are several that are good. The demolition of the raggedy bunch of outbuildings at the moment. There's a huge difference in levels and some amazingly high boundary treatments. Now, those provide in themselves both privacy, but also some loss of light and overshadowing. Now, they're already there, and there's not going to be any change to those. As part of the mitigation, the applicants have agreed to put in these side privacy screens, and that I think the committee can take as a positive indication from the applicant of how they want to try to reassure the neighbours that these aren't going to be unduly overbearing. So taking all that together, Chair, I support what Councillor Mayles and Councillor Bushman have done in terms of approving this application. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Councillor Edwards. Would anyone else like to speak on this? Or I think we've had quite a discussion on it, and we've had the recommendation moved and seconded as per the report. So shall we go to a vote? Are we ready to go to a vote? So can I have a show of hands for those in favour of the recommendation for approval of the application, please? Nine, and anybody against? One. So that means permission is given as per the recommendation, and but I hope that Mrs. Plant will understand that we have discussed it very carefully, and we understand completely her concerns, and that we've come to our decision in a fair way. And also, I always say on these occasions as well, you're living next door to each other. Please just try and keep friends and all the rest of it. It's very, very important, but I hope we're happy with the decision, so thank you, colleagues. Right, we'll come on to our next application now, which is a final application of the evening. To really make colleagues aware, you will know of our rule, the policy that we're supposed to finish planning meetings at 10 o'clock. but it's quite possible we will still be talking at 10 o'clock. So, if necessary, are we happy to extend to 10:30? Should it be, it may not be necessary, but should it be necessary, can I just see, are we all happy to do that? I know it's been a long evening, but it's been a long day, and if we didn't, it would mean that it would have to be delayed until the next meeting. And I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm wasting time now by saying all that. So we'll move on to 5 Pendock Court, Tollerton, and this is a 2-storey side extension. Mr. Pegram, please.
Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the application relates to a property 5 Pendock Court, as outlined on the screen for you there. The application has been revised through the passage of consideration. As originally submitted, it was a much more substantial 2-storey extension which came across the full width of the detached garage to the side that you'll see in a moment. Pendock Court is not an adopted highway, so it's a private drive. And as far as I understand from information presented to us, the road is owned effectively by the frontages to the road, and in particular in this instance, which will be pertinent to what I'll tell you in a moment, number 5 does own out to the middle of the road and owns part of the turning spur within the application site. That's the aerial photograph, just giving you a flavour of the pattern of development in the area. Pendock Court, as you'll see, is a modern development of 5 dwellings. That's looking from the road into Pendock Court, and the application property in question is here. Its side garden runs down through here. You wouldn't see the extension from this angle because it would be on the other side of the building, effectively. That's moving closer in along Pendock Court, and then looking across the front of the property, and you can see, Chairman, that it has a detached double garage to the side, 2 parking spaces in front of the garage, and the cars just come up to the edge of the site and the edge of the carriageway. That's looking head-on at the property again, and then looking in more detail closer at that garage and parking arrangement. That shows generally the relationship between the 2 properties, the neighbouring property and the application property. And then this is stood to the rear of the property, looking in a, if I get my bearings, Chairman, generally westerly direction. So Pendock Court runs in front of that fence, and this is the garden area to the property. And the other side of this fence are properties on Melton Road. So that's looking across the fence to a property on Melton Road. These properties do have quite long gardens, obviously. And then that's again looking down the side of the garage to show you the relationship with the neighbouring property. So the proposal, Chairman, is for a 2-storey extension. So you saw in the pictures there is a detached double garage in this position. The extension would effectively come across half of the width of that double garage. 1 garage would be retained with 2 parking spaces in front of the extension and the garage. I'm trying to find the image. So, Chairman, what this would necessitate is effectively cars would have to, or they'd have to change the surfacing or extend the driveway out into the turning area. Just to emphasise, Chairman, that is a private drive, it's not adopted. There's been a lot of concern from residents that the loss of part of that turning area would prejudice the abilities of vehicles to turn on the site and for delivery vans to turn, etc. Chairman, this scale of application we would not normally consult the Highway Authority on. We would refer to their standing advice. However, because of the issues that have been raised and because your officers are not highway experts, we did approach the Highway Authority. They are content that there would still be sufficient turning area on that site or in that turning area there for vehicles and delivery vehicles to turn. Maybe not the biggest of vehicles, clearly, but I would argue they couldn't probably do that now, but certainly transits and vehicles of ordinary passenger vehicles could turn in that area. In terms of the impact on neighbouring properties, Chairman, these properties fronting Melton Road obviously have quite long gardens. Our view is that although there may be a degree of overlooking potentially, that would not be unacceptable. It's been set away from the boundary to minimise impact on this property. In terms of the layout, Chairman, if I just flick to that, effectively at, so that's ground floor, at first floor, I can't read that without my glasses on. Yes, as I thought, it is a bedroom at first floor with an ensuite at the back. So in terms of any potential overlooking, it wouldn't be from a main clear glazed window. It would be from effectively there's a dressing room or ensuite room there. Chairman, the application is considered acceptable and it's before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have speakers on this item as well. And thank you all for your patience as well. It's been a long evening. So first of all, I have the applicant, who is Mr. Murdoch. And I'm sure you've heard me say already, but up to 5 minutes, and you press the right-hand button for the red light, and that starts the clock ticking down. Thank you.
So good evening, councillors. Just a bit of background really. We moved to 5 Pendock Court in 2013. This March will mark 6 years in our home, and since moving to Tollerton we've had a child who's now happily settled in his second year at the local primary school, Tollerton Primary School. We're all very happy living in Tollerton and have firmly planted roots here. But since moving into the house, the requirements of our family have changed, so that our family home needs to reflect that. The proposed extension will improve the facilities of the house and create a better and more suitable family home for our family. Following the first planning application submission, we have taken on board the planning officer's comments and the recommendations as well as those of our neighbours, and reapplied with a substantially reduced scheme which positions the proposed two-storey extension well away from the side boundary of plot 4, and by removing the current side elevation bedroom window provides more privacy to plots 3 and 4, where we currently have a view into both rear gardens and the conservatory of plot 3. Comments have also been raised by neighbouring property relating to the parking at the site. The plans that you've got before you have been developed to provide 3 parking spaces, 2 on a paved drive and 1 in a garage. Points regarding the proposed extension not being in keeping with the surrounding area and the original concept of Pendock Court have also been raised by neighbouring properties. Plots 1 and 4 are almost identical in style, layout and size and positioning within the court, whereas our house is completely different in these respects. It's almost as if our house is a separate house from the others. Our proposed extension has been designed to maintain much of the characteristics of the original style. One of the comments raised by the local councillor and a neighbouring property about the proposed extension suggesting that it was over-intensive and the plot was not big enough for a building of the size proposed. I also want to just clarify that our plot size is almost identical to plot 4, which is a 5-bedroom property. Both plots are in excess of 400 square metres. Our proposal fills in the gap between the existing house and the existing garage. Another of the comments raised by the councillor referred to the roof height differences. The 2-storey extension has a lower ridge height than the existing house, as per the Rushcliffe policy planning guidelines for householder extension. The councillor also commented that during the original development phase of Pendock Court, which Councillor Mason was involved in, that plot 5 should not be any larger. The conditions within the title deeds of plot 5 show that the only restriction to extending the property is that we must first get written consent from the original builder, Soul Homes, which we obtained prior to considering the development, and if you need copies of that, we can send you copies of that confirmation. So just very quickly, in summary, we believe that the current application has followed all Rushcliffe and National Planning Policy guidelines for householder extension, and our current proposal has been designed to take into careful consideration all objections and recommendations made by the various parties, with the aim of enabling us to enhance our existing home to meet the requirements of our family. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And our next speaker on this is, I think, a neighbour, Mr. Denham, please. That's how we'll share it. Right, so again, as you will have seen, it's the right-hand button and the red light will come on, and then up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, my name's Neville Denham. I live at number 4 Pendock Court, which of course is next door to number 5. I'm also speaking for the owners of 2 and 3 Pendock Court. We've consistently objected to this application, that is fairly represented in the officer's report. Pendock Court is a development of 5 detached houses, all with double garages. Numbers 1, 2, 3 and 4 are 5-bedroomed and externally the same. Number 5 at the moment is 4 bedrooms and of a completely different design, having also a double garage. The reason, quite simply, is that the plot for number 5 is long and narrow. You'll see this on the plan I've produced. The cross-hatching represents the private driveway over which we all have rights of way, and we are all jointly responsible for its maintenance. It's not adopted, no street lights, no pavement. The depth was only considered sufficient to accommodate a house of the current design. Sol Homes did apply to build a larger house on the plot. This would obviously attract a higher selling price, but as Councillor Mason, the ward councillor, says in her objection, you did not allow the application. We cannot see that anything has changed in the 6 years since number 5 was built, and we ask you to be consistent in your decision making and refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Denham. That's all very clear, and thank you for the plans as well. And finally, Councillor Mason, please, who is the ward member for Tollerton. Last but not least, hey.
That's just what I've got written down here, actually, last but not least. It has been quite a long night that we've waited for. Anyway, I suppose one of the main reasons that I was concerned about this proposal, especially initially, was actually that it isn't in a line, it is at an angle. It isn't, I don't find these particularly easy to see, I have to say, and it probably hasn't in the photos shown how it is at an angle, and it does go, the front of it does face into the centre and across the plot slightly. And therefore, with this slight angle, it does make a bit of a difference as to the extension. I was very pleased to see actually the work that happened afterwards, because it did make it a much better application, I believe, but I still had concerns about not overbearing. That perhaps is a bit of a exaggeration, but there was an impact on the neighbour. And I think it is one of those things that it can be very subjective. And when you are there on the site and you have a look at it, you can see how the angle does make a difference. In paragraph 28, it says that it's originally called a large extension, and that was the original extension. And this now, and then it talks about a more modest one, which I agree, it is more modest, but it also says, and it talks about a further step back of the garage, which helps to break up the massing of the frontage. And I think that is it. It's the massing of the frontage. It is different from the other houses. It isn't exactly the same, and it is very different, but it is a lot wider. It does seem a lot bigger, although there are only 4 bedrooms, and to take 5 will make it considerably bigger. So I would just like to really ask you to have a look at this and consider
the massing of the front of it, and also to consider, which doesn't always, I'm trying to look at the photographs to try and get an idea of which shows it best, of the angle of it, and it's because it has to fit in. And there you can see it a little bit, but actually it doesn't really show it, but I accept that that's it. So that garage is quite well set back to the house, number 4, next door. It isn't in line, it's quite a long way back on the site. Anyway, thank you for your time, and thank you very much, and I hope you have a safe journey home when you eventually get there.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. You've just taken a line from me as well, because I always finish the meeting off and have a safe journey home. So there we are. It's touche, isn't it? So, right, thank you. So we heard from Mr. Murdoch, who is the applicant, who explained that he and his family have lived there for 6 years, happily in Tollerton. The request for extension is because of family requirements, and explained as well about the parking arrangements, or the new, or what could well be the new parking arrangements. Unlike objectors, Mr. Murdoch considers it's in keeping with the neighbouring properties, and explained and also explained about the comments that were made about getting approval from a covenant for permission to make any changes. Obviously, that's not really a planning matter, though. Mr. Denham, who's a neighbour at number 4, is against the application, and explained that all houses have double garages, and also told us about the difference in house designs, and also the original developer apparently wanted that house, this house, to be larger, but was not told it couldn't be. And then Councillor Mason told us about her initial concerns or observations. The house is at an angle. She's a little happier with the revised plans, but still concerned, worried about impact on neighbours and the massing of the property. And I think that's covered the points. Would you like to make any comments?
I will be as brief as I can, Chairman. I do want to correct an error I made earlier, just to confirm what the layout is here. The proposal, effectively, you can see the original bedroom of the property there. Proposal is to create a walkway. I can go in a bit closer, but it will get a bit fuzzy. Yeah, we've had a change in software, I'm afraid, and it's presented 1 or 2 problems, which we are wrestling with. So, effectively, you've got the existing property wall ends there. That's the existing bedroom within the property. So, effectively, you come off the landing, that bedroom becomes a walkway with an extension to bedroom 1. The extension is for a bedroom here. This is actually described as a bed 5/study with non-suite there. So I just wanted to correct that, because I did say it was non-suite at the beginning. However, Chairman, just to give members a bit more reassurance there, that is proposed to, that's a high-level window, and it's proposed to be obscure glazed with the main window to that bedroom effectively looking down the applicant's own garden area. So that, just to clarify that point, Chairman, I don't want to misinform members. Sorry, I will zoom in again there because it's a pertinent point as well. You can see how the building steps back from the road. So there's the main gable. You step back to the existing part of the building where the door is. The extension would step back again to that point, and then the garage steps back to there. Officers' view is it wouldn't appear necessarily in the sort of mass that you see in a 2-dimensional plan. Chairman, just to clarify this point over what was originally intended to be built there, we had an application, I think it was 2006, for 8 dwellings on the site, and that was refused on the basis of overdevelopment, but also in terms of the impact of the vehicle movements up and down the driveway alongside the existing property, which fronts the existing highway. Both the case officer and I have sort of gone through in some detail the application, the subsequent applications for the 5 dwellings that were approved. Chairman, I can find no record of a proposal to build a 5-bedroom house on this property. If I'm wrong, I stand to be corrected. But the original proposal was for 4 5-bedroom houses and 1 4-bedroom house on this plot, and that is what we approved. And then there was a subsequent application in 2010 again for 4 5-bedroom houses and 1 4-bedroom house. Clearly, the applicant is entitled to apply for an extension to that property. We would have to consider whether that meant that the resultant building was overdevelopment. Chairman, as you know, our residential design guide standards require a garden area for a detached property of 110 square metres. In this instance, if you include the bit at the back, which is usable garden area still, that garden area equates to about 180 square metres. Even if you exclude that and just work on that part, it's 146 square metres or thereabouts. So clearly, it would be difficult to argue that the plot cannot accommodate an extension of the size proposed. There are a lot of private civil matters involved, Chairman. As we said, this is a private drive. The applicant would obviously have to resolve those issues out with the planning process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Yes, I think that covers the points and observations. So who would like to start discussing this one, please? Councillor Hetherington.
I think it was said early on about a turning point in the road here that the county council had said was quite capable of handling the traffic, so to speak, for turning purposes. But does this include the turning purposes for things like the Borough Council's trucks that they take down for cleaning up the various bins and everything else? Because there's obviously, we have to think about these things, don't we?
Dustbin lorries and trucks.
Chairman, we joke about this in the office. We probably have one of the largest bin lorries in the country, and we often have to get developments tracked to ensure that it can get round. I would doubt, even with the existing turning area, that our bin lorry could turn around there. The other issue is, Chairman, that Pendock Court is a private drive. My discussions with the Recycling to Go officer is that he will not take his vehicles onto a private drive. Obviously, if he causes damage to it, he could face compensation claims. The residents who are at the back probably could nod, but I would doubt our bin lorries go down the drive. I suspect they have to pull the bins down closer to the main highway for collection closer to the highway.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pegram. I saw some nods as well.
Yeah, sorry, I know they're not supposed to.
No, they're not. Councillor Edwards, please.
Thank you. Could we call up the picture of the full frontal view of number 5? That's it there, thank you. The application is reassuring in the sense that the proposed extensions are steadily stepped back, so they're clearly subservient there. There is a large gap, I don't know how much it is, between the corner of the house of number 5 and the corner of number 4, which is much greater than is the normal separation distance between two neighbouring properties. One of the garages is going to be retained, so even with that, there's still going to be a perfectly reasonable separation distance between the extended property and number 4. I accept that number 5 is a different design of house than the other ones on the road, but that doesn't prevent the owner of number 5 wanting to build an extension. That is perfectly reasonable. The distances to the houses at the back on Melton Road are considerable. So on that basis, Chairman, I'd move the recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. And Councillor Mayles seconding. Right, okay. Just write that down so I don't get that wrong. Right, would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Donoghue.
I suppose for me the crux of the matter is it in keeping with the other houses, bearing in mind that originally the design was somewhat restrained to match the other houses, so is it in keeping with the actual close? And to me, I think that's the crux of it. Is it going to look out of place or over dominant compared to the other houses? So that in some ways is a concern, and I can sympathise with the neighbours in such a small private close that if it feels that it's going to over-dominate or affect their privacy in some way, then should it be granted? So I just want to voice that.
Absolutely fine, and that's why, again, it's for members to make their own minds up, and that's what we're here for, to decide that. So perfectly right to make that comment. Right, and no one else speaking on this. So have we discussed it enough? No. Councillor. Oh, Councillor Mayles, yes.
Number 3 recommendation does not mention the bricks and so forth.
The facing, etc. Yes. Yes, it needs to be to match the existing property. Yeah. Right. Shall we go to the vote on this? Are we happy? So I think we've discussed it in a hopefully in a fair way. So show of hands. We've got the recommendation as moved by Councillor Edwards and seconded by Councillor Mayles. Show of hands, please, in favour of the recommendation, please. So that's unanimous. No one against, so permission is granted. I'm not being flippant when I say this, but again, neighbours, please, good neighbourly relations, hopefully, and I hope everyone realises we've had a good discussion. Right, colleagues, it's 11 minutes past 10. You're looking as if you want to say something.
Just very quickly, Chairman, I know members are very much like our appeal reports, and we have struggled to get them to you because of the workload we have. There is one particular significant decision that we will report to you next time, and that is the application and enforcement matters that related to the Gypsy and Traveller site on Flintham Road at Screveton. Members may recall that the Gypsies moved onto that site on the 2nd of January last year. They put in an application very shortly afterwards that we refused. We also served 2 enforcement notices. They appealed the refusal of planning permission and the enforcement notices. The effect is that effectively the inspector allowed the appeal against refusal of planning permission. So he's granted permission for the Gypsy and Traveller site. In terms of the enforcement notices, it's a rather confusing situation because they only appealed on ground G, which is that the requirements of the notice were unreasonable. He effectively, in a roundabout way, he did dismiss those appeals and modified the notices, but the effect of granting planning permission effectively supersedes those notices. So he has granted planning permission for the 6 Gypsy and Traveller plots on that site. Tantamount to a permanent permission, but for the named individuals. So it's obviously permanent for, and their resident dependents. So it's permanent for the time that those people live there, or it's temporary for as long as they live there, whichever way you like to look at it. Thank you, Chairman. And we will do a detailed report on that for the next meeting.
Okay, right. Well, thank you for that, Mr. Pegram. Well, thank you, colleagues, for your patience and input tonight. It's been a long meeting, lot of items. 11 minutes past 10, we'll close the meeting and safe journey home. Thank you.